Hey everyone! If you're looking for a story that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about success and love, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments below where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see who's joining us from around the world. The pivotal 12 seconds. They say life can change in an instant. For Aaron Knight, it changed in exactly 12 seconds. What if the most terrifying moment of your life, the one where you face your greatest fear, also brings you face to face with an unexpected miracle? One moment, Aaron Knight was sipping overpriced espresso on the terrace of his London penthouse, idly scrolling through a finance report he'd already read twice. The next, his world tilted, spun, shattered into a million pieces. His 5-year-old son, Liam, was choking. The nanny screamed. Aaron froze for the first 2 seconds, his heart slamming into a frantic panic. The sound of his porcelain cup shattering on the marble floor was somehow quieter than his own ragged breath. The boy's face was turning blue. Liam's wide eyes, filled with terror, clawed at his throat. No sound. No air. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday morning. Now he was watching his son die. Then, suddenly, a woman he didn't recognize was on her knees beside Liam. She'd been in the building lobby, he would later learn. A pediatric nurse named Dr. Clara Jenkins, visiting her mother on the floor below. She heard the frantic screams from the hallway, burst into the apartment without asking, and dropped to her knees with terrifying, clinical calm. 911 is on the way, someone stammered, frantically dialing. But Clara didn't wait. She positioned herself behind Liam and began the Heimlich maneuver. Quick, sharp, focused. 1, 2, 3 thrusts. Then, a violent gag. A small, colorful piece of candy hit the polished floor. Liam gasped, cried, breathed. The air rushed back into Aaron's own lungs, a gasping, ragged relief. The room erupted. Relief, sobs, applause. But Aaron didn't move. He just stared at the woman on the floor who gently cradled his son's head and whispered, "You're okay, buddy. You're safe. You're okay." In that moment, she wasn't just a stranger. She was a miracle. Clara didn't wait for thanks. When the paramedics arrived and Liam was declared stable, she calmly gave her name and credentials, scribbled a few concise notes for the ER team, and stood to leave. Aaron, finally shaking off his shock, stepped in her way. "Wait," she turned, her expression tired but polite. "Yes, Mr. Knight?" "How do you know who I am?" he asked, startled. She gave a soft, knowing smile. "You own the building. You're constantly on the news. You donated £1 million to Royal Pediatrics last year." He blinked, surprised by her detailed knowledge. She added, "Good cause. Poor follow-through. You didn't visit the wing. You didn't meet the kids." "No," he insisted, his voice raw with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "I mean it. Dinner. Anything." She paused, then truly looked at him. Aaron closed his eyes. "I'm not a story you can turn into a headline," she said, her voice even. "I'm not asking for a story," he replied, his gaze unwavering. Their eyes held for a beat too long, a silent acknowledgement of something more, something undefined. Then she left, leaving him alone in the quiet apartment, the echo of her words lingering in the air. "Squaw, what do you think of Clara's blunt honesty? And what is the true meaning behind Aaron's sudden desire to properly thank her? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this intriguing encounter has captivated you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of this extraordinary story. A connection forged the next day. Aaron found her. He'd had his team track down where she worked, Westbridge Medical, Pediatric Trauma Unit. He showed up with a sprawling bouquet that cost more than a month's rent in most parts of the city and stood awkwardly in the sterile hallway, waiting for her shift to end. She looked at the flowers, then at him, a dry amusement in her eyes. "That's a ridiculous number of roses." "They said it was romantic," Aaron admitted, a faint blush rising to his neck. "We're not dating yet," Clara countered, a rare, playful glint in her gaze. She shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips, but she didn't walk away. It was a slow start. Lunch in the bustling hospital cafeteria, coffee before her shifts shared in the quiet dawn of the city, text messages exchanged between high-stakes meetings and late-night hospital rounds, not overtly flirty yet, but filled with a growing, undeniable meaning. She challenged him, relentlessly calling him out when he dodged emotion, when he retreated behind his corporate facade, and somehow she made him laugh genuinely, openly, in a way no one else could. Liam, his 5-year-old son, adored her. He asked for her by name, drew countless pictures of her with imaginary sparkles in her hair, always beaming. She wasn't impressed by his money. She didn't care about his vast reputation. And maybe, just maybe, that's precisely why Aaron found himself utterly unable to stay away. What profound impact do you think Clara's presence is having on Aaron and Liam? And what does it truly mean to find happiness after profound loss? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of an unexpected connection yet is touching your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of their extraordinary journey. One night after Liam was finally asleep, Clara came over. Not for dinner, not for a date, just to talk. Aaron poured them both wine, the amber liquid swirling in their glasses. They sat on the balcony of his penthouse, the city breathing around them, its million lights a distant, glittering carpet. "Why do you always act like you're fine when you're clearly not?" she asked, her voice soft but direct, cutting through the silence. He looked at her, truly seeing her. "My wife, Sarah, died 5 years ago," he said, the words heavy with unspoken grief. "And I still don't know how to grieve without feeling like I'm betraying her memory." Clara's expression softened, a shared understanding in her eyes. "I know what it's like to lose someone too soon." "Who did you lose?" he asked, somewhat surprised. She hesitated, her gaze distant for a moment. "My brother, Tom. Cancer. He was 9. A profound silence settled between them, a quiet testament to shared loss. "Is that why you became a pediatric nurse?" he asked, the connection dawning on him. "It's why I learned to breathe again." Later that night, as she stood to leave, a fragile hope in his voice. He asked, "Stay." She turned, her eyes questioning. "Why?" "Because for the first time in a long time," Aaron confessed, his voice raw with vulnerability, "I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel alive." Clara didn't answer with words. She simply walked to him, stepped into his space, and kissed him. Slow, real, and utterly honest. What do you think is the true meaning behind Clara's unwavering boundaries? And why does Aaron struggle so much with not being able to fix things with his power? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story of an independent spirit challenging powerful expectations is captivating you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next part of their dramatic journey. The cost of integrity. Peace never lasts long in stories like this. 2 days after their first kiss, Clara received a call from the hospital board, an anonymous complaint. The voice on the other end said, "Regarding improper boundaries with a patient's family." Aaron was livid. He immediately offered his top lawyers unlimited money, all his considerable influence, but Clara declined it all. "I can fight my own battles, Aaron," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "But it's my fault," he argued, the words raw with frustration. "No," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "It's my choice." Her eyes held his, a silent challenge. "But if I lose this job, Aaron, we're done." "Why?" he asked. Good, bewildered. "Because I won't let myself become dependent on you." That night he lay awake, staring at the polished ceiling of his penthouse, wondering how love could feel so right and so impossible at the same time. Aaron Knight had fought wars on the stock exchange. He'd faced down ruthless CEOs, defiant senators, and scandal-hungry journalists. But nothing felt as personal or as utterly helpless as watching Clara walk into a closed-door disciplinary hearing with her career on the line, knowing there wasn't a single pound he could spend to fix it without making everything worse. He waited outside the boardroom for over an hour, pacing the hushed hallway, the silence pressing in on him. When she finally emerged, her face was unreadable, a mask of quiet resolve. "Well?" he asked, his stomach tightening with dread. "They're suspending me," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Without pay, pending further review." "On what grounds?" His own voice was sharp, laced with fury. "Violation of professional boundaries with the parent of a minor patient. That's absurd. You saved my son." "I broke the rules, Aaron." "You saved my son!" "I still crossed a line." She didn't cry, didn't raise her voice. She just stood there in the silent hallway, hands tucked into the pockets of her scrubs, like someone who knew exactly what it costs to be right and still lose everything. "I'll fix this," he said, stepping closer, reaching for her. "No," she replied, her voice softer now, but with an iron will beneath it. "You'll respect that this is mine to fight." "Aaron," she emphasized, her eyes holding his. "I mean it. If you push this, I walk away." It was the first time Aaron truly felt the sharp, undeniable edges of her. Not just her kindness, not her strength, but her fierce boundaries. She would not be saved. Not by him. Not by anyone. He watched her walk away, the echo of her footsteps louder than any boardroom silence he'd ever endured. What do you think is the most painful accusation Clara faced? And why? And how will she fight back against such public slander? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience against injustice is gripping you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for the next powerful revelation. A quiet retreat. Aaron wanted to burn everything down. His rage was monumental, but Clara wouldn't let him. "I fought to be someone I could be proud of," she said, her voice quiet, but firm. "I won't lose that now, just because people are louder than the truth." "I can protect you," Aaron insisted. His fists clenched. "I'm not asking for protection," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm asking you to believe me." He did. Of course he did. But this wasn't about belief. It was about power. And Clara was done letting hers be taken. She held a press conference. Alone. She stood before the cameras in a simple gray blazer. No makeup, no handlers. Just her. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I'm honest. I've spent my life walking into rooms people run from. I've lost patience. I've made mistakes. But I've never, not once, exploited a child for personal gain. And I certainly didn't fall in love with a man because of his bank account." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces of the journalists, holding their gaze. "I fell in love with him because he made me feel like I was more than what I'd survived. And I'll never apologize for that." The room was silent, utterly hushed. Then someone asked, "Do you regret the relationship?" Clara looked straight into the camera, her integrity shining through. "No," she said, "because he and his son reminded me that love can be real, even after the worst happens, and I'll never apologize for that." By nightfall, the tide had turned. The vicious story shifted. A deluge of support flooded in. Letters, donations, heartfelt apologies. The clinic swiftly reinstated her full-time. The hospital board issued a public apology. The people who mattered knew the truth. That night, as the city lights twinkled beneath them, Aaron took Clara's hand, drawing her onto the rooftop of their building. "You didn't just save Liam," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You saved me too." He dropped to one knee, a simple, heartfelt gesture. No velvet box, no meticulously prepared speech. Just a small gold ring held between two fingers, shining softly in the dim light. "Marry me, Clara Jenkins." Clara's breath caught, a choked laugh escaping her lips, tears streaming down her face. "Say that again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Just once, so I know it's real." "Marry me," he repeated, his voice unwavering, filled with absolute certainty. She nodded, a single joyful tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Yeah, I will. Yes." Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into the deepest, most heartfelt kiss of his life. And in that moment, as his lips met hers, he knew. He had finally found something worth more than all the money in the world. Their wedding, 1 year later, was a dream. Not because of a grand venue or extravagant details, but because it was real. When Clara walked down the aisle, her eyes locked on his, Aaron knew he had never been more certain of anything in his life. But beyond the wedding, what mattered most was what they built together. With Clara's fierce passion and Aaron's immense resources, they launched the Jenkins Knight Initiative, a program dedicated to helping young women build their careers in business, providing them with the mentorship and opportunities that Clara had once fought so hard to earn on her own. Their days were filled with profound purpose. Their nights were filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and a love that grew deeper with every shared breath. And every morning, when Aaron woke up next to the woman who had utterly changed his life, he knew. He had finally found something money could never buy: happiness, unwavering love, and a future worth everything. They spent their honeymoon in Italy. Liam came too, of course. It wasn't a conventional start to a marriage. But then, neither of them had lived conventional lives. They walked along cobbled streets in Florence, shared gooey gelato in Venice, and danced barefoot under the stars in the gardens of a small villa overlooking the coast. Clara laughed more in those 2 weeks than she had in the last decade. Her joy a symphony Aaron silently memorized. And at night, with Liam asleep in the next room, they whispered promises to each other beneath soft sheets and open windows. Not perfect, but real. Always real. What an incredible journey for Aaron and Clara. What was your favorite moment in their story? Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments below and tell us why. A brother's legacy. Then came the call. Late one afternoon, back in London, as the city groaned beneath the oppressive summer heat, Clara stepped into her clinic for a regular shift and was met by her director. "There's something you should see," the woman said, handing her an unmarked envelope. Inside, a printed article draft, unpublished. The title screamed, "The Nurse, the Billionaire, and the Other Son." Clara's heart stopped. The article claimed Aaron had a second child, a son born of an affair during his marriage to Sarah, now living abroad. The piece insinuated Clara had agreed to marry him only after discovering this information as part of a quiet arrangement to keep the story from going public. It was a lie, a cruel, precise one, but it felt deeply personal, because someone had gone digging. Too deep. Too close. That night, Clara asked him, "Aaron, is there something I don't know?" He stared at her, stunned. No, he said slowly. There's no other child. No hidden life. I swear to you. Her voice was quiet. Then why does this feel so specific? He sat down, then exhaled something heavy. A truth held captive for years. There was someone. Before you. After Sarah died. It wasn't serious. But she told me she was pregnant a few weeks before she disappeared. I hired a private investigator. She'd left the country. I never confirmed anything. He looked up, his eyes raw. I haven't told anyone. Not even my lawyers. Because I didn't want to chase ghosts. Clara stood still. Aaron, if there's even a chance. I know. Silence filled the room. Then she asked quietly, what would you do if it were true? He didn't hesitate. I'd find him. I'd bring him home. The story leaked within days. Not the full, drafted article, but a headline. A whisper. A grainy photograph of Aaron exiting a building he hadn't entered in years. The media ran with it. Night scandal buried by marriage? Clara kept her head down. She went to work. She loved Liam. But she felt the shift. On the street. In the grocery store. Even at the clinic, where some parents looked at her like they weren't sure whether to admire or judge her. Aaron stayed silent publicly, fiercely protecting Clara. Privately, he searched. Within a week, he had a name. Danielle. 6 years old, living in Lyon, France. With a woman who'd changed her name and refused contact with anyone from her past. And a DNA test confirmed it. He was Aaron's son. Clara read the report in silence, then looked at Aaron. So what now? I go get him. She nodded. I'm coming with you. Lyon was warm and quiet. The streets buzzed with summer markets and music. But Clara could see the tension in Aaron's shoulders as they stood outside the small yellow house on the hillside. The door opened slowly. The woman who stood there was thinner than the photo, tired in the eyes, guarded, and behind her, a boy. Dark curls, big, serious eyes. He looked like Liam. Aaron stepped forward. I'm not here to fight you. I just want to meet him. The woman studied him. Then, after a long moment, stepped aside. And for the first time, Aaron knelt before the boy and said, Hi, Daniel. I think I might be your dad. Daniel said nothing. But he didn't run. And that was enough for a start. They stayed in France for 2 weeks. Clara watched Aaron slowly build trust with a boy who'd only known shadows of him. They played cards, kicked a soccer ball, talked about space and animals and English breakfasts. Daniel didn't call him Dad. Not yet. But when they said goodbye at the airport, the boy ran after Aaron and hugged him tight. Will I see you again? He asked. Aaron knelt. I promise. Back in London, Clara tucked Liam into bed. He looked up at her with sleepy eyes. Do I still get to keep you forever? He asked, his voice small. Clara kissed his forehead. Always. But that night, as she lay beside Aaron, he whispered something into the dark. Do you ever think this is too much for you? Clara turned to face him, her heart overflowing. No, she said. I think life finally stopped taking and started giving. He reached for her hand beneath the covers. And I think we're just getting started. What kind of future do you envision for Aaron, Clara, and their now blended family? How will the bond between Liam and Daniel grow? Share your thoughts below. 6 months later, the London townhouse felt different. Louder, warmer, lived in. Daniel was moving in. It had taken time, months of paperwork, therapy, meetings with lawyers and mediators. But Aaron had been patient, gentle, present, and Daniel had responded. He still didn't call Aaron Dad, but he called him when he had a nightmare, and that meant more. Clara, meanwhile, had become the quiet, steady center of the house. She didn't push. She listened. She gave Daniel space, and he, in turn, gave her his cautious trust. Liam adjusted fast, faster than anyone expected. He told everyone he had a bonus brother, and he liked that Daniel was good at Legos, but bad at Mario Kart. The boys were different, one loud and imaginative, the other cautious, careful. But somehow, beautifully, they worked, just like the two people raising them. Clara stepped into her clinic role full-time again. But this time, it wasn't about proving anything. She focused on community programs, bringing vital care to children without access. She started a scholarship in Tom's name, her late brother's. Aaron matched every donation, but only after asking her permission. She'd earned that kind of respect. He knew better now. In late fall, as the leaves fell and the holidays approached, Aaron planned something quiet. No press, no spectacle, just family. He brought Clara back to the Vermont cabin one weekend, just the two of them. They hiked, talked, held each other, and on the final night, beneath the canopy of 1,000,000 stars, he surprised her with a second ring. Simple, elegant, engraved inside with the words, "Not because I lost, but because I found." Clara didn't cry this time. She just smiled, kissed him slowly, and whispered, "Forever." They didn't need a second wedding. They had a second life, and that was enough. Months later, Clara found out she was pregnant. She sat with the test in the bathroom for 20 minutes. Stunned. Not scared. Just overwhelmed by the sheer joy. Aaron walked in, saw her face, and immediately dropped to his knees. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded, silent, then handed him the test. His eyes widened, then filled with tears. He held her for a long, quiet moment, whispering, "You're incredible," over and over until she believed it too. They told the boys together. Liam screamed with joy, throwing his arms around them both. Daniel didn't say anything at first, just went quiet. Later that night, Clara found him sitting alone on the stairs. "You okay?" He looked up. "I don't know how to be a big brother." She sat beside him. "Neither did Liam. Neither did I when I had my brother. You don't have to be perfect, Daniel. You just have to be you. That's enough." He leaned into her shoulder. "Do I still get to stay?" Her throat tightened. She looked him in the eyes, her voice filled with unwavering love. "You're not going anywhere." When their daughter was born, they named her Eleanor, after Clara's mother. Daniel held her first. Liam sang to her, off-key but full of love. Aaron cried harder than anyone, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. And Clara, she just watched the life she never imagined unfold around her, piece by piece, like the final perfect snap of a complex puzzle. One evening, years later, Clara stood in the hallway outside the nursery. Eleanor had just fallen asleep in Aaron's arms. Daniel was in the living room, reading aloud to Liam, and the whole house was lit with the kind of soft golden light that only exists when love has earned its way in, when a family is truly, deeply home. Aaron came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her gently back against his chest. "You okay?" he asked. She leaned back into him, completely at peace. "I'm better than okay. I'm alive." He smiled, kissing the top of her head. "I never said thank you." "For what?" she whispered. "For saving Liam, for saving me." She turned in his arms, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't save you, Aaron. You let yourself be saved." Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, quiet, real. And inside, their life went on. Messy, beautiful, unscripted, true. built not from perfect beginnings, but from second chances. Aaron Knight once thought that success was everything, that power, wealth, and control were all that mattered. But then came Clara Jenkins, the woman who proved him wrong. She wasn't just another employee. She wasn't just a passing distraction. She was his greatest challenge, his greatest lesson, his greatest love. And in the end, it wasn't power or money that changed his life. It was her. Now they stand together, not just as husband and wife, but as partners in life, in love, and in purpose. Because love isn't just about finding someone, it's about choosing them every single day. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss another heartwarming emotional tale. Because sometimes the most unexpected stories lead to the most unforgettable love. Love has the power to change everything if we're brave enough to let it.
Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Love doesn't always begin with a glance. Sometimes it begins where the world is quietest, inside a silence so vast it swallows every lie and dares to awaken a kind of truth no one dares to name. Ilara Monroe never dreamed of a fairy tale. She wasn't the chosen one, nor the cherished one. She was just a quiet literature teacher in Charleston who, on a pressure-filled June afternoon, was pulled into a wedding that wasn't hers. The groom was Cassian Holt, a former celebrity photographer now living in darkness after a devastating accident. He was her mother's dream, her family's financial solution, the perfect role her sister Sienna no longer wanted to play. Ilara was forced to step in, to borrow a name, a perfume, a collection of memories that didn't belong to her. She walked down the aisle as if stepping into a haze, a plan carefully set to vanish in a matter of days. But what she hadn't expected was that inside the darkness Cassian called home, something began to bloom. Not a grand love, not yet, but something quieter, slower. Something that didn't need eyes to grow, only truth and time. Walk down the aisle, right now. Her mother's grip tightened around Ilara's wrist. Ice cold, but her voice was a blade. In the cramped dressing room, dim lights couldn't soften the tension. The wedding coordinator's frantic knocking pounded like a drumbeat against her ribcage. "Sienna isn't coming," her mother said, every word a verdict. "You don't get a choice." The wedding gown glittered like a diamond-studded snare on Ilara's frame. It was beautiful, suffocatingly so. No one had asked if she agreed. No one noticed her vacant stare in the mirror where a stranger stood, wearing someone else's life. Sienna stood at the door, arms crossed, face unreadable, carved from ice. "You always dreamed of being the bride, didn't you?" Her smile cut sideways. "So go ahead, play the part." Ilara's name had replaced Sienna's on the marriage license. The dress fit. The only thing left was her walk down the aisle, to take the place of the woman Cassian Holt had once been engaged to. Cassian Holt, once a brilliant photographer, now lived in shadow. He couldn't see, but he could sense everything. For 6 months, Ilara had practiced being Sienna. Her voice, her laugh, even her scent. She had become a perfect copy, or at least, perfect enough to deceive a man without sight. The cathedral flickered with candlelight. Stained glass shimmered like fragments of memory across the floor. Ilara moved as if into an abyss, head down. At the altar, Cassian stood still as stone. His blind eyes were half closed, his head tilted slightly, glistening for something no one else could hear. The minister's voice rang through the vaulted silence. "Ilara Monroe, do you take Cassian Holt to be your lawful husband, in honor, in love, and in duty, until death do you part?" She didn't look at Sienna, but she knew she was there, watching. Ilara hesitated, her silence stretched. Then, throat tightening, she said, I do." Cassian turned his head slowly. His voice was low but deliberate. "Why are you shaking? Are you afraid I'll see you?" Her breath stopped, but the cameras caught only her forced smile as thunderous applause echoed. Ilara reminded herself, "Just a few days, sign the papers, disappear." But under the golden lights and lies, her chest tightened. She had stepped into a role, but she wasn't sure anymore if she could walk back out. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided down quiet streets, lamplight streaking across the windows like smudged ink. Ilara sat beside her legal husband, a man she had never truly met, but whose every breath she had memorized. Cassian Holt said nothing. He sat upright, hands interlaced, eyes half closed as if asleep. But Ilara knew better. He was listening. Not to the world outside, but to her. The rustle of fabric, the uneven rhythm of her breath, the soft click of her heels. He listened like a composer crafting a symphony from silence. When the car stopped before Holt Estate, a grand historic mansion on Charleston's northern edge, Ilara stepped out as if sleepwalking. The gate opened automatically. The stone path was smooth, calculated. The house didn't welcome her. It simply stood, flawless, lifeless, untouched. Inside, the lights were dim. The doors glided open without sound. The flowers were fresh but scentless. Along the walls hung black and white photographs, landscapes, buildings, memories frozen in monochrome. But not a single portrait. A butler bowed politely. "Congratulations, Mrs. Holt." Cassie placed a gentle hand on her back, guiding her toward the dining room. No celebration, no toast. Just silence stretching over a long table, set for two in cold, white porcelain. They sat across from each other. Ilara rested her hands on her lap, steadying herself. Cassian broke the silence first. "Your voice, it's different." She flinched. "Different how?" Softer, slower, a slight rasp at the end. Ilara gripped the fabric of her gown under the table. "Maybe I'm just tired. It's been a long day." He nodded, then inhaled as though the air itself held secrets. "And your perfume? It's not the usual?" She swallowed. "I forgot to wear it." He didn't respond, but the silence between them thickened like mist. Ilara forced herself to eat. The food tasted bitter. Cassian ate with methodical precision, as if every motion had been rehearsed. When she tried to rise from her seat, his voice stopped her. "Do you remember our first phone call?" She froze. "We talked about Paris, didn't we?" "I told you about Paris. You told me about your cello." Ilara's hands tightened on the chair. She had never said that. That was Sienna. Cassian tilted his head slightly. "You once said you wanted to open a bookstore by the lake." "Oh, right," she replied quickly. "I did say that." He shook his head gently, setting his napkin down. "No, she never said that." She didn't move. Cassian continued calmly. "I have a very good memory, sometimes so good it makes people uncomfortable." Ilara said nothing. She only stared into her glass of water, seeing not her reflection but the woman she was trying to be. And in that moment she realized the man who could not see was already seeing everything. Ilara began waking up early. No more ringing the bell for staff. No more scripted commands she'd memorized to act like her sister. Instead, she slipped into the kitchen each morning and carefully prepared soft-boiled eggs. The way Cassian's former assistant had once said he liked. At first, Cassian didn't respond. He continued to sit by the window, as always, his fingers gently tracing the edge of the table as though measuring the world through touch. Then one morning, as Ilara set the plate gently before him, he said softly, "She never made me breakfast." Ilara paused, her hand still holding the spoon. "I know," she replied. "I just wanted to try something honest." There was no thank you, no protest, but there was also no distance. Just a quiet pause, peaceful, uncertain. Ilara slowly began to change the house. She opened the curtains to let in sunlight, replaced scentless arrangements with lavender, white daisies, and fading peonies. She read to him in the evenings, not Bronte or Austen, but gentle, quiet novels. Stories with little philosophy, but full of feeling. One night, after she stopped reading, Cassian tilted his head. "Your voice, it's warmer. The way you touch my hand, it's different. Even your silence, it doesn't sound the same." Ilara placed the book down. "Are you saying you know I'm someone else?" Cassian didn't answer immediately. He simply murmured, "If you are someone else, I think I might want to know you more." She didn't speak, but her heart beat faster, not out of fear, but because something had begun to wake inside her. She started taking him for walks in the garden. No cane, she guided him with her hand in his, walking slowly. When he asked, "Where are the orchids?" Ilara froze. Orchids were Sienna's favorite, not hers. "I thought maybe today the other flowers deserved a voice," she whispered. Cassian smiled for the first time. Not a smile of comfort, but the kind of smile a man gives when he's certain the woman in front of him is no longer pretending. The reading room was filled with morning sunlight. Ilara had just finished arranging a row of books, quietly breathing in the stillness she had grown to love. The room had once been sealed off, a silent shrine to the light Cassian had lost, but she had slowly brought it back to life with small touches. Open curtains, dried flowers, a warm cup of tea placed just to the left. What she didn't expect was that the next person to enter the room would be Sienna. No knock, no warning. She walked in like the house still belonged to her. Behind her, their mother followed, heels clicking against hard wood like a countdown. "We need to talk," her mother said, flatly. Ilara rose to her feet. "About what?" Sienna circled the room slowly, scanning every detail like an actress examining a set. She picked up a book, flipped through a few pages, then dropped it onto the desk with a sharp thud. "You're getting a little too deep into character," she sneered. "The maids say you make him breakfast, take him for walks, read to him every night. Seriously, Ilara? Did you forget you're pretending?" Ilara didn't reply, but this time she didn't look away either. Their mother cut in, voice like glass. "You really think he's going to marry you again? He loves Sienna, not you." Ilara looked at them both. Her voice was steady, quiet. "He's not a transaction. He's a man, and I love him because he deserves kindness." Silence. Sienna laughed. "Cold and cruel. Love? You think you can love someone when the whole thing started with a lie?" Ilara answered, her voice no longer trembling. "If he finds out the truth and he chooses to leave, I'll still know I did the right thing, because I never treated him like a possession." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then their mother whispered, slowly, like casting a curse, "Don't fool yourself into thinking this is love. You're borrowing a place that was never yours." The door slammed behind them. Ilara didn't cry, but something inside her cracked, silently, slowly, like a fault line no one could see, but one that would never fully mend. Cassian didn't say it outright. He wasn't the kind of man who used words to make an impact. Everything he did was quiet, measured, like even the world needed time to catch up. That evening they sat together in the living room, 2 cups of tea steaming under the soft glow of amber light. Ilara was reading to him, a short story, not particularly profound, but peaceful. When she reached the final sentence, Cassian spoke. His voice was slow, gentle, like a question that didn't need an answer. "You know, I'm going to Switzerland." Ilara froze. "Switzerland?" He nodded slightly. "There's a doctor there. They're testing a new procedure. The chances aren't high, but there's still hope. The air seemed to thicken. Ilara set the book down, her fingers curling into the fabric of her skirt. "You want to see it again?" Cassian didn't answer immediately. He turned his face toward the far corner of the room, where the light didn't reach. "What I fear," he said, "isn't that it won't work, but that it might. That I'll open my eyes and no longer recognize the world I once believed was beautiful." Ilara wanted to say something kind or reassuring, something like, "I'll be there." But every word felt fragile. She said nothing, just nodded. Once, Cassian leaned back into the chair. "I used to think the world was full of beauty. Faces, light, fragments of memory captured through a lens. Then I lost my sight. And what remained wasn't darkness. It was truth." Ilara turned her face away instinctively, as if avoiding his gaze, even though he couldn't see. What she feared wasn't the surgery. It was the light that might come with the truth. After that night, time passed like a thick novel no one dared to turn. Cassian didn't talk much about the trip. Ilara didn't ask. But every day she stayed beside him, quiet, steady, like the heartbeat of the house. Each morning she made his tea. Each night she read aloud. She never mentioned Switzerland, never brought up the surgery, as if silence might keep time from moving forward. But time didn't stop. It moved. Slowly, surely. When they arrived in Zurich, the sky was veiled in fog. Their hotel sat beside a lake so still it mirrored the clouds. Ilara barely slept. On the nights before surgery, she sat beside Cassian's bed, her hand resting lightly over his, trying to remember every detail in case she lost him in the morning. Cassian remained calm. He said, "If it works, I'll open my eyes and see a new world." But in his voice, something faltered. And Ilara thought, if he sees the truth, will he still choose me? The unbandaging day came 12 days after surgery. Zurich was blanketed in quiet snow. Ilara sat beside his bed like every morning, but this time she didn't read. She simply held his hand gently, as if trying to hold on to a piece of something before truth walked into the room. Cassian lay still, his face calm, strangely serene. Ilara didn't know what he was thinking, but she knew she had never been this afraid. When the doctor stepped in, time seemed to thicken. "I'll remove the layers one by one," he said. "Let the light do the rest." Ilara nodded, but she wasn't sure if she still wanted the light. The final bandage fell. Cassian didn't open his eyes right away. Maybe it hurt. Maybe he was afraid. Or maybe because he had already seen it all. Then, slowly, he opened his eyes. No blinking. He just looked. And his very first gaze landed on her. Ilara froze. Not because of that gaze, but because it didn't show any surprise. Cassian looked at her like he had been seeing her for a long time. "You're not Sienna." He didn't say it as a revelation. He said it the way someone names a star they've always known was there, just waiting for the right moment to be seen. Ilara gasped. "When did you know?" Cassian didn't answer right away. He gently touched her hand, his fingers tightening as if they carried meaning in every gesture. "Since you called me Cassian, not in the way she used to. Since you told me about the bookstore by the lake, something Sienna never dreamed of. Since you said I'm sorry like someone learning how to be forgiven for the first time." Ilara's tears streamed down. She lowered her head, covered her face with her hands. "Why didn't you say anything?" Cassian smiled softly, not bitter, not angry. "Because I didn't want the truth to make you run away. I wanted to see if I let you be yourself, would you choose to stay?" Ilara looked up. "I lied. I lived under a name that wasn't mine. I don't deserve you." Cassian gently shook his head. "You were the first to place the tea on the left side because my right hand is weak. The first to read not to impress me, but just to be near. The first who didn't try to change me." "Ilara," he called, soft as breath. "I didn't need light to see you." And for the first time, he opened his arms, not to forgive, but because he had finally found the real person behind a world of masks. After the day Cassian opened his eyes, nothing unfolded the way Ilara had imagined. There was no storm of emotions, no definitive ending, only silence, thick and unyielding, like a fog that clung to every corner of the house, to every breath between them. He didn't send her away, but he didn't call her by her name like he once had. He remained kind, gentle, and distant. A distance she could no longer cross. Ilara found herself returning to the same place she thought she had long escaped from, the substitute. But this time, there was no more disguise to hide behind. And that frightened her. Not the light itself, but the clarity that came with it. The fact that he now saw her and still kept that distance. They lived under the same roof like two people who might have lost each other in another life. Every gesture became cautious. Even the lightest brush of hands turned into something they silently avoided. Then came a gray, cold afternoon. Ilara sat alone on the back porch, beside a bed of fading white daisies. She didn't know why she had walked out, maybe because she could no longer bear the silence inside the house. A silence that now had weight, now had sound, now had meaning. Cassian stepped outside, not because she called him, not because he planned to, but because he too couldn't stay inside that silence anymore. And when he saw her, he stopped. They sat across from each other. No words. Then Ilara spoke, her voice raw and unfamiliar, as though her own throat had forgotten how to hold truth. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She simply let the words come, trembling but clear, that she hadn't come for him, that it started with a phone call, a promise, a role she once thought she could abandon quickly. But then she had stayed for the stories she read, stayed for the nights she placed a cool cloth on his forehead when he had fevers, stayed for the tea she brewed quietly every morning, stayed for every small touch she never dared to name. Cassian said nothing, but in his eyes something softened, something shifted, a recognition subtle but unmistakable. And then he said, in a voice lower than usual, "You were the first person who didn't try to lead me anywhere. You just sat beside me and listened." That sentence made Ilara close her eyes for a moment. She shook her head slowly. "I don't need your forgiveness," she whispered. "I just need you to see me for me." There was a pause. Long, still, holding everything between them. Then Cassian stood, not quickly, not slowly, just with a quiet finality, as if something inside him had come to rest. He looked at her once more. Then gently, with a steadiness that didn't force but invited, he extended his hand. "If you're still here tomorrow morning," he said, "then stay. Not out of duty, not because you feel sorry, but because I want to begin again, with you." 1 year later, in the misty hills of Oregon, a small center rests quietly beside a crystal-clear lake. On a rustic wooden sign carved by hand in soft curves are the words, "The Touch of Light." No one here calls Cassian Holt a millionaire. No one mentions his past as a once famous blind man. To everyone, he is simply Teacher Cassian, the gentle man who teaches blind children how to feel the world through sound, through touch, through the rhythm of their own hearts. Ilara is beside him, no longer the substitute, no longer wearing someone else's name. Here, everyone calls her by her real name, and only that. She teaches literature and guides visually impaired students on morning walks around the lake, helping them hear the water, smell the wildflowers, and realize that the world isn't only made for the eyes. Mornings here breathe like quiet music. The wind moves softly across the cabin roofs. Sunlight filters through leaves and dances across the lake. Children's laughter rings like little bells. Ilara stands on the porch, holding a book in one hand, watching Cassian under a tree, listening to a child describe the color of rain he has never seen. It's not a perfect life, but it's a true one. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, Ilara still sits alone on the steps, remembering the path that brought her here. The lipstick, the disguises, the lies she once wore like a shield. But now there is nothing left to pretend. Cassian steps outside, holding 2 cups of warm tea. He sits beside her, no questions, no need for words. The warmth of his hand touches hers, not too tightly, not too softly, just enough to say, "This time, we chose each other, and this time, it's in the light." Somewhere far from Oregon, beneath the blazing red roofs of Florida, Sienna Quinn now lived with her new husband, a young, handsome senator, ambitious and adored by the nation. On social media, they were the image of modern love, powerful, polished, picture-perfect. Except, 4 months ago, a car accident had taken his sight. Forever. Since then, each morning, Sienna woke early to brew tea, pick out his shirts, guide his hands through color palettes he could no longer see. She learned how to describe a sunrise, learned how to read emotion not by glances, but by sound. The man, gentle, trusting, called her the light of his life, again and again, with absolute belief. And every time Sienna smiled, a smile that barely curved her lips, never reached her eyes. One morning, as she sat at her vanity, applying a shade of red lipstick, a habit now no one saw, her Bluetooth speaker crackled to life with the morning news. Entrepreneur Cassian Holt has received the International Humanitarian Award for his work with the blind community, alongside his wife, Ilara Quinn, co-founder of the Touch of Light Center in Oregon. Her hand paused, the lipstick froze in midair, her fingers trembled, slightly, and then she laughed. No sound, no sorrow, no release, just the quiet drop of something inside her, falling and never echoing back. She set the lipstick down, lifted the tea, walked over to her husband and gently placed the cup in his hands. Then leaned close, her lips near his ear, voice low and soft. "I'm not the light, my love. I was never meant to be. I'm just the shadow that once stood in the wrong place and believed it was enough." No one heard it, no one judged, but something shifted. Truth doesn't always punish, but it always remains. Not every love begins with truth, but the ones worth keeping always end in it. If this story left something in your chest, a burn, a tear, a breath you didn't know you were holding, hit like, comment below, and let someone else find this moment too. Subscribe for more stories that feel more like memories than fiction. See you again, right here in the next one. "Who let her in?" The voice sliced through the marble hall like a blade. Every servant in the Blackwood Manor held their breath, turning toward the entrance. Beneath towering archways and a cascade of crystal chandeliers, a lone figure emerged. Jasmine Carter stood still, clutching a crumpled envelope tightly to her chest. She wore a modest, worn-out dress, hair neatly tied back, and the curve of her pregnant belly could no longer be hidden beneath the thin fabric. Her eyes scanned the faces now staring at her, some curious, some judgmental, but no one spoke. They didn't have to. Their expressions said it all. "She was expelled," someone whispered. "And now she dares to return?" Jasmine said nothing. She drew a long, trembling breath, her narrow shoulders rising, then stepped up the marble staircase. In her hands, she carried nothing but a letter, and a truth too heavy to deny. She wasn't there to ask for forgiveness. She didn't need a second chance. She had returned, not to beg, but to bring truth back into the room where it was once silenced. From the top of the stairs, Ethan Blackwood appeared. The man who had once cast her out without mercy now stood frozen, eyes caught somewhere between shock and dread. 6 months hadn't erased the memory of that storm-swept night. 6 months earlier, the iron gates of the Blackwood Manor creaked open, groaning like a place that had long forgotten how to welcome anyone. Jasmine Carter stood outside, shoulders burdened by a threadbare backpack, hands trembling as they gripped a stack of papers. Her face was composed, but her eyes carried a desperation that had learned how to stay silent. Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper of many years, opened the door. Her expression unreadable, her voice sharp as a blade. "You're 5 minutes late." "I'm sorry." Jasmine bowed her head. "The first bus." "Rule number 1, Whitmore cut her off, stepping past the threshold like a shadow, tall and stern. "Never explain." Jasmine fell quiet, clutching her documents to her chest. A clean conduct certificate, a letter of recommendation from the Hope Haven shelter, and a medical report confirming her virginity. A revolting requirement, but her only ticket in. Inside, the mansion was polished to perfection, so pristine it felt inhuman. Thick carpet swallowed the sound of footsteps. Jasmine followed Whitmore through halls lined with silent maids, their uniforms immaculate, their eyes colder than porcelain. "Rule number 2, Whitmore continued, voice flat. "You are never to be noticed. You are air, a piece of furniture." Jasmine nodded, lips pressed tightly. "Rule number 3, the woman paused before a narrow room at the far end of the corridor. "You are never to step inside Mr. Blackwood's study, under any circumstances." The door shut behind her and Jasmine finally exhaled. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid thump of her heart. In her fingers, the silver crucifix her mother had once given her still hung. She clutched it tightly, as if anchoring herself to a world not yet lost. In that tiny room, Jasmine whispered to herself, "Not this time. I won't break. This time." The library was Jasmine's first assignment, a vast room with dark wooden walls, a ceiling that reached toward the heavens, and thousands of old books stacked in solemn silence like eternal witnesses. Jasmine moved like a shadow, the dust cloth trembling slightly in her hands as she cleaned shelf by shelf. The chime of the grandfather clock startled her, and then she felt it, a shift in the air, cold, sharp. Someone was watching her. "Who authorized your entry?" The voice came from behind, low but commanding. Jasmine turned slowly, the cloth slipping from her grasp. Ethan Blackwood stood at the threshold, tall, immaculate. A custom black suit hugged his frame like armor, but it was his eyes, amber, framed by thick lashes, burning with a steel-wrapped fire that rooted her to the floor. I was assigned the library, sir," she said quietly, eyes dropping in obedience to the rules. "Look at me." His voice was thunder and silk, resonant, deliberate, striking something deep within her spine. Jasmine raised her gaze. For a heartbeat, time faltered. Their eyes met, and something unnamed passed between them. "Your name?" Ethan stepped forward, each stride seeming to draw the very air with him. "Jasmine Carter, 18. A faint, cruel smile touched his lips. "The orphanage sent you?" Before she could answer, something slipped from his pocket. A worn photograph. Jasmine bent to retrieve it out of instinct, but froze when she saw it clearly. Ethan, younger, smiling beside a woman cradling a baby, joy in their eyes. "Don't touch that," he growled. But Jasmine's fingers had already brushed the edge. A jolt of cold shot through her. The storm struck New York City like the return of a long-forgotten curse. Thunder roared, winds howled, and rain fell in sheets, as if some forsaken god had decided to weep in fury. Jasmine Carter sat in the back of the taxi, gripping her old cell phone, left behind at the Blackwood Manor. It was her only connection to the orphanage and to Sister Jasmine, who might find records about her mother. And 11 p.m. The iron gates loomed through the downpour. Jasmine stepped out, her thin coat soaked instantly as she approached the service entrance. Mrs. Whitmore had warned her once, "If you ever use this key without just cause, don't bother coming back." But Jasmine had no other choice. Inside, the mansion was cloaked in darkness. Only a faint glow leaked from the study. She retraced her steps through the marble corridor, heading to the supply room, where her bag likely was. A crash rang out. Thunder or something else, she wasn't sure. And then the unmistakable clink of glass on glass. From the study, she hesitated, then moved. The door was ajar. Ethan stood near the window, his silhouette framed by lightning. A half-empty bottle of whiskey dangled from one hand, his white shirt stained with blood, left hand cut and dripping. "The maid who doesn't follow rules," he rasped without turning, "looking for more photos that aren't yours?" "You're bleeding," she whispered, stepping closer. He let out a bitter laugh. "Sharp eyes, it's the anniversary of my wife's death. What would you know about loss, Jasmine?" She didn't back down. "Pain doesn't care about social class, Mr. Blackwood." He advanced. "Are you lecturing me now?" His shadow loomed like a storm. "You're just someone who's already lost everything," Jasmine said, lifting her chin. "And that's exactly why I'm not afraid of you." Silence. Then Ethan murmured, "You've never belonged to anyone, have you?" Jasmine said nothing. A small nod was answer enough. In that moment, there were no rules, no roles, just two human beings, bare, wounded, and alone. Thunder cracked above them as his mouth found hers, as if the storm itself was the only place bold enough to hold something so forbidden. 3 weeks later, the morning at the Blackwood Manor looked like any other, but Jasmine knew this day would mark an ending. Her stomach curled each morning, and today marked the third in a row. The child was growing inside her. Mrs. Whitmore entered her room, gaze sharp as ever. "Should I assume Mr. Blackwood is the father?" Jasmine wiped her mouth, steadying herself. "My personal life is none of your concern." "In this house," Whitmore snapped, "everything is my concern." Less than an hour later, Jasmine was summoned to the study. Ethan stood by the window, back turned, gripping an envelope in his hand. "How much?" he asked, voice cold as stone. "Excuse me?" Jasmine whispered. "How much for your silence and disappearance?" She froze. Not from surprise, but from the sting. "You think I came back for money? You're an orphan, poor, untouched. You appeared on the anniversary of my wife's death. Convenient, isn't it?" Jasmine let out a dry laugh, eyes damp but refusing to cry. "No, I came back because I forgot my phone. Without it, I can't reach the orphanage." Ethan didn't flinch. "This is your termination letter, along with enough money to start a new life, somewhere far away." Jasmine didn't look at the envelope. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a wrinkled letter. "I wrote this the morning after that night, before I knew about the baby, before you became this." She placed the letter on his desk, her gaze void of expectation. "You don't have to read it, but one day, you will." Jasmine walked out of the study without looking back. The letter remained on the desk, and Ethan stood frozen, saying nothing. Rain had begun to fall by the time she reached the gates. No one came to see her off. Only Mrs. Whitmore, sharp-eyed as ever, and a few scattered maids pretending to be busy, their eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. No hands reached for her. No one dared say goodbye. Only her footsteps echoed across the marble, like defiance carved in rhythm. Jasmine held her head high. No rage, no regret, only the rain, carrying her dignity away from a place that once tried to bury it. 6 months, 180 nights, and each night, Jasmine Carter still heard the thunder from that evening, the night everything ignited, began, and shattered. When she returned to the Blackwood Manor, there was no rain, but the sky was just as gray as the memory. Her hands carried nothing but one resting gently over the curve of her belly, 6 months of pregnancy. 6 months of silence. But today, she had not come to plead. She had come to remind someone of a truth he had tried to bury. The housemaids froze as she entered. Some turned away, others stared. No one spoke. Once, she had been the maid, the untouched girl who trespassed where she shouldn't. Now she returned, belly unveiled. Not hidden, but held high like a banner. I survived, and I'm not afraid anymore. She's not allowed. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, voice sharp as ever. Let her in, Ethan's voice called from the top of the staircase. Silence fell like a curtain. Jasmine lifted her chin. He stood tall as ever, sculpted from stone. But something cracked in his eyes when he saw her. Like a truth he'd tried to forget taking form before him. They entered the study. No one spoke. There was no need. On the desk, it waited. The letter. Still sealed. Edges yellowing, her heart ached. You never read it, did you? She asked, not accusing, only sad. Ethan looked at the letter as if it were both sacred and dangerous. His hand trembled as he lifted it. Slowly, he opened the seal and read, eyes moving across every line. Ethan, by the time you read this, I will have left. Not out of fear, but to preserve what dignity I had left after that stormy night. I don't write to demand anything. I write so you'll know that what happened between us wasn't a mistake. At least, not to me. You once asked if I had ever belonged to anyone. The answer was no, until that night. I didn't belong to you in the sense of possession, but in the way two broken people sometimes find each other in the ruins, if only for a moment. I know who I am. An orphan girl, poor, nameless, unremarkable. But that doesn't make what I felt for you cheap. It was real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. When I touched that photo of you and the woman from your past, I wasn't trespassing. I was trying to understand the pain behind your eyes. Because I too carry losses I've never dared to name. I don't need you to love me, but I need you to know that honest feeling doesn't come to destroy. It comes to illuminate. If someday you find this letter and your storm has passed, read it, not with your logic, but with whatever part of you still remembers how to ache, to long, and to love. I am leaving, not because you cast me out, but because I choose not to stay where truth is denied. But I carry no resentment, only a piece of that night when I was truly alive, if only once. That was the truth, and if you are brave enough to face truth, perhaps this could still be a beginning. Jasmine, the air in the room thickened. Ethan inhaled sharply. His hands clutched the edge of the desk. Why didn't you make me read it? He whispered. Because I didn't want to beg, Jasmine answered. Her eyes held no tears. Because people only read the truth when they're ready to be hurt by it. He stepped closer. Then, before anyone could stop it, Ethan dropped to his knees. No performance, no strategy. Just a man finally realizing that something weighed more than pride, more than control, a truth he had refused to face. He pressed his forehead against her belly. I don't deserve you, but please, don't let me keep running forever. Jasmine placed her hand on his shoulder. I didn't return to be kept, she said. I returned so you'd never forget what we both lost. 2 days after Jasmine's return, someone unexpected arrived at the Blackwood Manor. Richard Blackwood, Ethan's father, the man who had vanished from his life after his mother's death. Ethan faced him in the study, where the pale morning light cast long shadows, echoing secrets left unspoken for decades. Why are you here? Ethan asked, tension coiling in every word. Richard looked at his son as if he'd aged 10 more years. To tell you something I've lacked the courage to say for 20 years. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. Your mother's death, Richard paused, his voice catching. It wasn't an accident. The air froze. She took her own life because she discovered I had betrayed her. I was planning to marry someone else for a political alliance to save the company. Ethan stepped back as if struck. Victoria, your wife, found out the truth. She threatened to expose everything. I ordered someone to scare her. Just a warning. But she died, Ethan said, voice like splintered steel. Richard bowed his head. I didn't want that, but I started a chain of mistakes I couldn't stop. Silence fell. Why now? Ethan asked, voice low. Because you're about to become a father, Richard replied softly, and you need to know, if you want to break this legacy of darkness, you have to face it first. Ethan turned away, but the redness in his eyes spoke volumes. He did not forgive. But he understood now. To love rightly, sometimes you must learn from the worst. The grand hall of the Blackwood Enterprises glowed under chandeliers. Hundreds of eyes from media, shareholders, and business elites locked onto Ethan as he stepped onto the emergency press podium. In his hand was a sheet of paper, not a financial report, but Jasmine's letter, now neatly folded like a sacred testimony. A year ago, Ethan began, his voice reverberating like thunder, I let a woman walk out of my life, not because she was wrong, but because I was too much of a coward to admit that truth hurts more than lies. A wave of murmurs rippled across the room, but Ethan stood tall. Jasmine Carter, she's not just a maid. She's the first person who ever looked at me without fear, the one who loved me, not for my power, but for the man buried beneath it. A senior shareholder cut in, Are you turning a scandal into some romantic speech? Ethan replied, eyes cold and cutting. I'm turning a rotting legacy into a future worth living. If I have to choose between my unborn child and the reputation you're trying to protect, I choose my child. Tension filled the air like a taut string. Then applause broke out from the last man anyone expected, Richard Blackwood, his father. My son, he said, voice firm, has done what I never had the courage to do. Place love above power. And then Jasmine appeared at the back of the hall. Blue dress, rounded belly, eyes shining like a lighthouse cutting through every shadow. Ethan stepped off the podium. No need for judgment, no need for forgiveness. He needed only one thing, to walk toward the woman he chose. The old chapel of the Blackwood Manor had never witnessed a wedding like this. No lavish display, no nobles or aristocrats, only those who had once witnessed pain, and now were here to witness the opposite, healing. Jasmine stood before the mirror, her hand trembling slightly as Mrs. Whitmore fastened the pearl necklace, the only jewelry left from Ethan's mother. Do you think Elena would have accepted me? Jasmine whispered. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her through the mirror, her voice soft for the first time. If she were alive, I believe she would have opened the door for you that night. Music began to play. Not the usual wedding march, but a piano composition Ethan had written. A fusion of his mother's favorite melody and a new one, written just for Jasmine. Ethan stood at the altar, in a plain suit, no emblems, no symbols, just a man who had learned to love after losing everything. When Jasmine appeared at the doorway, the room held its breath. Her 7-month belly did not dim her beauty. It made every step she took a declaration of hope. The vows were not long. Ethan looked at her and said, I used to think strength meant letting no one close, but you touched the weakest part of me and never walked away. Jasmine smiled, eyes glistening. I used to think love was a privilege for those who had everything, but you taught me it's a choice, and today I choose you. They exchanged rings, simple, unadorned, melted from the gold of his mother's heirloom and the silver from Jasmine's childhood crucifix. A new legacy, born not from status, but from pain that had been forgiven. The first contraction came at dawn, just as sunlight spilled through the bedroom window. Jasmine lay with her head on Ethan's chest, their fingers tightly intertwined, as if time could no longer pry them apart. It's time, she whispered, lips trembling, but her eyes steady, fearless. Ethan rushed her to the hospital, urgent but not panicked. From the moment they entered the delivery room, the world held its breath. As Jasmine screamed in labor, Ethan gripped her hand, not to control, but to carry the weight with her. He was no longer the cold-hearted businessman of a year ago. He was a father, trembling, waiting for the first cry of his daughter. And then it came. A cry, strong, fierce, as if tearing through every silence that had ever bound the Blackwood name. Jasmine wept, Ethan wept, and when the nurse placed the baby in their arms, every apology, every regret, every loss melted away. "What will we name her?" he asked, voice thick with emotion. Jasmine looked down at their daughter, jet black hair, warm brown eyes, then turned to him and said, "Elena, after your mother, because she deserves to be remembered for something beautiful." Ethan smiled through his tears. Elena Blackwood. A tiny soul, an old name, a new meaning. And in that moment, as Jasmine cradled their daughter and Ethan wrapped his arms around both, they were no longer the legacy of pain. They weren't rewriting the legacy, they were building a new one, not from empire, from empathy, not from might, from mercy. Time passed, the old scars faded, but instead of vanishing, they became memory, and memory became the foundation of a different kind of future. At the Blackwood Manor, the piano no longer played lonely notes. Now, it sang each late afternoon under the tiny fingers of Elena Blackwood, a little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's hands. Jasmine was no longer the orphan girl standing in the rain. Ethan was no longer the man hiding from truth. They were a family, not perfect, but honest and brave. Richard, the father who once lost everything to power, now sat quietly in the garden each morning, rereading old letters his wife once wrote, with eyes that had finally learned how to weep. And in a quiet corner of Ethan's study, the once winkled letter still remained, now framed in glass, a declaration of truth once ignored but never erased. If anyone asked what was the strongest thing they had ever done, the answer would not be building a corporation or winning public favor. It would be to love.
The impossible heir. He built an empire, but never believed he could have a child. Until he meets a little girl with his most intimate mark. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below where you're watching from so we can bring you more incredible stories. The cold morning air cut across Jonathan's face like a knife, but it wasn't the chill that made his hands tremble as he held the phone to his ear. On the other end of the line, the lawyer's voice sounded distant, almost unreal, repeating words that seemed to come from another world. Paternity confirmed. Genetic compatibility. He let the phone slip from his fingers and fall to the stone ground of the Plaza de la Paz, where he could still see the remnants of the previous day's craft market. 3 years. 3 years lost. 3 years that Isabella had grown up without him. 3 years that Sophia had rebuilt an entire life far from Seattle. Far from him. Far from the pain he himself had sowed with his cruel words. Jonathan knelt and picked up the phone with fingers that couldn't stop shaking. The memory of the little girl running between the market stalls, laughing with the same infectious giggle he recognized from old photos of his own childhood, came back like a punch to the gut. Isabella, his daughter, the girl he had rejected even before meeting her, whom he had called a lie, a medical impossibility, a betrayal. The doctor had been clear on the phone just minutes before the lawyer's call. "Mr. Caldwell, infections like the one you had can cause temporary infertility. It's not uncommon for there to be a partial recovery years later. Your body may have gradually healed." Words that came 3 years too late. 3 years after destroying the only woman he had ever truly loved. 3 years after missing his daughter's first steps, her first words, her first smiles. The wind from the mountains rustled the branches of the trees around the square, creating shadows that danced on the ground like ghosts of all the mornings he had missed. Mornings when Isabella woke up calling for her mommy. Mornings when Sophia made coffee alone. Mornings when his daughter learned new words without him being there to hear them. Jonathan brought his hands to his face and felt something wet trickle between his fingers. When was the last time he had cried? Probably the day he received the infertility diagnosis, 15 years ago, when he decided he would never be a father, never have a family, never open his heart completely to anyone. Now he was there, alone in the empty square, with the paternity confirmation in his coat pocket and a void in his chest that seemed to consume everything around him. Sophia hadn't even answered his calls for the past 2 days. She knew he had discovered the truth. She knew he was in the city and had chosen silence as her response, the same silence he had imposed on her when he should have listened, should have trusted, should have believed in the love she offered him, along with the news of the miracle she carried in her womb. Isabella existed. She was his daughter, and he had been the biggest coward in the world. Before we continue this heartbreaking story, we have to ask, what would you have done in Jonathan's place? Would you have fled from the news, or would you have faced it? Comment your opinion below. The man who couldn't be a father. 3 years earlier, Jonathan Caldwell was defined by a relentless routine. He woke up at 5:30 in the morning in his minimalist Seattle apartment, drank black coffee while reviewing financial reports on his tablet, and was at the office before 7 a.m. The Caldwell Tower was his kingdom. From the 23rd floor, he commanded a real estate empire he had built brick by brick, contract by contract, always alone, always trusting only himself. Sophia entered his life like a hurricane of color in the middle of his controlled, gray existence. They met at a contemporary art exhibition, where she was presenting sculptures made from recycled materials. He was only there out of social obligation, accompanying an important client. When his eyes met hers from across the gallery, Sophia was laughing a little too loudly, gesturing with her hands as she explained her creations, with blue paint under her fingernails, and wearing a printed dress that looked as if it had been hand-painted. "Do you understand art?" she had asked, approaching him with a smile that lit up the entire room. "I understand investments," he replied, trying to maintain his professional composure. "How sad," she said, tilting her head. "Art shouldn't be an investment. It should be passion." That word, passion, had resonated in his mind for weeks. Jonathan didn't know passion. He knew goals, strategies, measurable results. But Sophia constantly challenged him. She questioned his worldview with simple questions that left him speechless. "Why don't you have plants at home? Why don't you listen to music while you work? When was the last time you stopped just to watch the sunset?" For 2 years, she had tried to break down his barriers with infinite patience. She brought him flowers at his office, left him little drawings taped to his bathroom mirror, and cooked traditional Mexican dishes he had never tried, despite being born in a city with such a large Latino population. Sophia knew his story. She knew about the medical diagnosis he carried like armor. She knew he used that information to maintain an emotional distance from anyone who could hurt him. "I really don't want kids," he would say every time the subject came up indirectly. "My life is complete just the way it is." Sophia never argued. She just smiled with that mysterious air he never fully managed to decipher. She spoke of the future as if it were a blank canvas waiting to be painted, while Jonathan saw the future as an Excel spreadsheet where every cell was already filled with mathematical precision. Deep down, he knew she dreamed of a family. He saw how her eyes would light up when they passed by parks and saw children playing, how she would stop to chat with babies in elevators, how she would save small toys she found in the streets in case they ever needed them. But he had been clear from the beginning. Children were not part of his plans, and his medical condition made it a natural impossibility. Or so he believed. The impossible miracle. It was a rainy Tuesday in May when Sophia showed up at Jonathan's office unannounced. He was in a video conference with investors when his assistant knocked on the door with a nervous smile. "Mr. Caldwell, a Mrs. Morales is here. She says it's urgent." Jonathan frowned. Sophia never looked for him at work. She religiously respected the boundary he had established between his personal and professional lives. "Tell her to wait 15 minutes, he murmured, returning his attention to the charts on the screen. But 15 minutes turned into 40, and when he finally opened the meeting room door, he found Sophia sitting in the reception area, holding a brown envelope against her chest, as if it were a treasure. She was wearing a yellow dress he had never seen before. Her hair was down, falling in waves over her shoulders, and there was something different about her face, a light he couldn't identify. "Sorry for the delay," he said, quickly kissing her cheek. "I had an important presentation." "There's always something," she replied. But the tone wasn't a complaint. It was almost happy. They went into his office, and Jonathan went straight to the chair behind his desk, maintaining a professional distance even in an intimate moment. Sophia remained standing, the envelope still pressed against her chest, her eyes shining in a way that made him uneasy. "Jonathan," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something. Something incredible." He crossed his arms, preparing for another of her artistic ideas. Maybe a new exhibition, a trip she wanted to take, a change to her studio. "I'm listening." Sophia took a deep breath and opened the envelope, pulling out a small black and white photo. Her hands were shaking as she placed it on the glass table, pushing it toward him like a sacred offering. "I'm pregnant, Jonathan. 12 weeks. The world stopped. Jonathan looked at the ultrasound image without being able to fully process what he was seeing. A tiny human form, with clearly defined arms and legs, floated in the center of the photo like an impossible miracle. "This is a mistake," he said automatically, his voice coming out colder than he intended. "But you can," Sophia interrupted, her voice full of emotion. "The doctor explained that sometimes the body recovers, that infections like yours may not cause permanent infertility. It's our baby, Jonathan, our miracle." She approached the table, her eyes filled with happy tears. "Just imagine it. A child with your eyes, with your intelligence, running around the house, filling our lives with laughter." But Jonathan had already stood up, turning his back to the window that showed Seattle spreading out in the rain. 15 years of believing he could never be a father, 15 years of using that certainty as a shield against any dream of a family, 15 years of building an identity based on controlled solitude. "No," he said, without turning around. "This can't be happening. How can you say that?" Sophia's voice trembled behind him, filled with a pain that Jonathan could feel even without turning. "This baby is a gift, Jonathan. A miracle life is giving us." He kept looking out the window, watching the raindrops trickle down the glass like tears he couldn't shed. Seattle stretched out below, full of life, movement, families walking down the streets with small children. A reality that had always seemed distant, impossible, out of his reach. "Miracles don't exist, Sophia," he said, finally turning to face her. "Medical facts exist, and the fact is that I'm infertile." "But the proof is here," she exclaimed, pointing to the ultrasound on the table. "The proof is in front of you. Our son exists. He's growing inside me right now." Jonathan looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The yellow dress that enhanced her skin, the hands that trembled with emotion, the eyes full of hope and love. For a second, a minuscule part of his heart almost believed. He almost allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to hold a baby in his arms, to teach a child to walk, to be called Dad. But the doubt was stronger than the hope. 15 years of medical certainty couldn't be erased by a black and white photo and words about spontaneous recovery. "Who is it from?" The question left his lips before he could stop it. Cold and sharp as a knife, Sophia recoiled as if she had been slapped. How? How can you ask that? Who is it from, Sophia? He repeated, crossing his arms. Because we know it's not mine. Tears began to stream down her face, but there was something beyond sadness in her eyes. There was disbelief, as if she couldn't believe the words she was hearing. Jonathan, I love you. Only you. For 2 years. Only you. How can you think that I— Because it's the only logical explanation, he interrupted, his voice taking on the business tone he used in difficult negotiations. You know about my condition. You always knew. And now you show up here with this. He gestured toward the ultrasound, as if it were something repulsive. This is our child, Sophia yelled for the first time since they had met. Your child! Why can't you accept that maybe, just maybe? Medicine was wrong, because I trust science, not fairy tales, he replied coldly, and I won't be made a fool of. Sophia approached this table and took the ultrasound with hands that were shaking violently. You want a paternity test? DNA? Anything to prove this baby is yours, Source. Source, I want you to leave, he said, returning to his chair and pretending to organize papers. And don't come back with this charade. The silence that followed was deafening. When Jonathan finally looked up, Sophia was standing in the doorway, holding the ultrasound against her chest, tears streaming silently down her face. One day, you're going to find out the truth, she whispered, and you're going to regret this forever. The door closed softly behind her, and Jonathan was left alone with his empire of glass and steel, exactly as he had always wanted. Now it's time to dig deep. What do you think about Jonathan's reaction? Is his fear of being wrong understandable, or is it pure cowardice? Tell us your thoughts. The unspoken truth. That night, Jonathan arrived home determined to stick to his decision. The Seattle apartment was too quiet, and for the first time in 2 years, there was no scent of cinnamon and coffee that always announced Sophia's presence. She was sitting on the balcony, looking at the city lights, a small suitcase at her feet. Are you really leaving? He said. Not as a question, but as a statement. Sophia didn't turn around. I can't stay where I'm not believed, where my love means nothing. Jonathan poured himself a shot of tequila and sat on the leather armchair on the other side of the room, maintaining the physical distance that reflected the emotional one he had created between them. The liquid burned his throat, but failed to burn away the strange sensation that had been growing in his chest since that afternoon. Where are you going? He asked, trying to sound casual. Asheville, North Carolina. My sister Carmen has a spare room, and there's a community of artisans there. I can start over. With another man's child. Sophia finally turned around, and he saw that she had been crying a lot. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was a new determination on her face that he had never seen before. With your child, Jonathan. He has always been and always will be your child, no matter how many times you deny it. She stood up and walked toward him, stopping a few feet from the armchair. You know I never lied to you. In 2 years, I never hid anything from you. I never betrayed you. I never did anything that could break your trust. Why would I start now? Jonathan took another drink, avoiding her gaze. People change. Circumstances change. I didn't change, she said softly. My love for you didn't change. The only thing that changed is that now I'm carrying a part of you inside me. She placed her hand on her stomach, still imperceptible, but which for her was already real. It was already life. It was already a future. When this baby is born, she continued, he will have your eyes, your stubbornness, perhaps your intelligence for numbers, and I'll look at him every day and remember the man I loved, but who was too cowardly to believe in love. Don't make me the villain in this story, Jonathan retorted, standing up abruptly. I didn't ask for this. I didn't promise this. From the beginning, I made it clear that you were infertile, yes, she interrupted. But you never made it clear that you were also incapable of loving. That discovery is new to me. Sophia picked up her suitcase and walked to the door. On the threshold, she stopped and turned around one last time. "I'll leave my new address with Carmen, in case you change your mind, in case you decide to take another test, in case you want to meet your child when he's born, in case you decide to stop being afraid of happiness." The door closed softly, and Jonathan was left alone with the silence he had always wanted, discovering that too much silence could also be a form of torture. The following months passed like a gray haze in Jonathan's life. He immersed himself in work with an intensity that impressed even his most ambitious partners. He closed 3 major deals. He expanded the company to San Francisco and Las Vegas. He worked 16-hour days, as if exhaustion could silence the thoughts that insisted on visiting him in the early mornings. But the nights were relentless. In the empty apartment, surrounded only by the hum of the city below, Jonathan found himself looking at the balcony where Sophia used to read her art books, the kitchen where she made cinnamon coffee every morning, the wall where there were still marks from the paintings she had taken with her. Dr. Hernandez, his doctor for more than 15 years, was surprised when Jonathan showed up at his office asking for new fertility tests. "But Jonathan, we've talked about this several times. Your condition." "I want to be sure," he interrupted, avoiding explaining the real reasons. The results came back 2 weeks later. "Severe infertility, but not absolute," the report said in technical language that Jonathan reread dozens of times. "Very low count of viable sperm, but with a remote possibility of natural conception." Remote possibility. The words echoed in his mind as he walked the streets of Seattle, watching families walking together. Fathers carrying small children on their shoulders. Pregnant women holding hands with their partners. Had he been too hasty? Too cruel? But pride was stronger than doubt. Jonathan had built his entire identity around control, certainty, the ability to predict and manage every aspect of his life. Admitting he had been wrong, that he had hurt Sophia unfairly, that he had lost the opportunity to be a father. That would mean admitting he wasn't the rational, infallible man he believed himself to be. In November, 6 months after Sophia's departure, he almost called Carmen to ask for her sister's phone number. Almost. He got as far as dialing the number he found online. He heard Carmen's cheerful voice answer, but hung up before she could say, "Hello?" What would he say? How would he explain it? "She will be named Isabella, like my grandmother. The strongest woman I've ever known." Dr. Morales, the gynecologist in Asheville, was impressed by Sophia's physical and emotional strength at every appointment. "I've never seen such a serene pregnancy," he would comment. "This baby is growing up surrounded by a lot of love." Sophia would smile, knowing it was true. Despite the pain of being rejected by the man she loved, she had found an inexhaustible source of love within herself, a love that didn't depend on anyone else, that grew with Isabella's every movement, with every piece of furniture she created, with every day she woke up grateful to be alive. She had become a completely different woman from the one who had left Seattle, and that woman was ready to be a mother. Isabella Morales was born one morning in March, when the first spring rains began to awaken the wildflowers in the mountains of North Carolina. The labor was long but peaceful, with Sophia maintaining a serenity that impressed the entire medical team at the small Asheville hospital. Carmen held her hand as she pushed, whispering words of encouragement. "Come on, sister. Your princess wants to meet the world." When Isabella finally arrived, small and perfect, with dark, curly hair and powerful lungs that announced her arrival to the world, Sophia felt her heart explode with a love she hadn't known was possible. But it was when the nurse placed the baby in her arms that she saw something that made her world stop for an instant. On Isabella's left arm, very visible against her pink skin, there was a small birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, identical to the one Jonathan had in the same place. A mark he had shown her on an intimate night, telling her that his mother said it was a sign of good luck. "My God," Sophia whispered, tears streaming as she delicately traced the small mark with her finger. "You really are your father's daughter." Carmen came closer to see what had caught her sister's attention. "What is that?" "Proof," Sophia replied, kissing Isabella's forehead. "Proof that her father can never deny when he's ready to meet her." In the following days, as Isabella settled into her new routine of feedings and naps, Sophia found herself torn between the pure joy of motherhood and a deep longing for Jonathan to be there. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. The first cry, the first smile, the first sleepless nights taking care of her daughter. In all those dreams, he was present. "Should you call him?" Carmen suggested one afternoon, as she watched Sophia breastfeed Isabella on the balcony. "Tell him about the birth. He has the right to know." Sophia shook her head gently. "He had 9 months to change his mind, to look for me, to believe me. If I call now, it will look like I'm begging for his attention. But it's his daughter, Sophia, and now you have proof he can't ignore." Sophia looked at the crescent moon birthmark on Isabella's arm, which was sleeping peacefully in her arms. It was tempting, very tempting. She imagined calling Jonathan, describing the mark, seeing him finally understand that he had made a terrible mistake. But a part of her, the part that had grown and strengthened during those months, knew that wasn't how things should happen. "If he wants to meet Isabella," she said finally, "it will have to be because he decided to believe in love, not because he was presented with physical proof. Our daughter deserves a father who accepts her out of love, not out of obligation." Isabella stirred in her arms, opening her dark eyes, so much like Jonathan's, and Sophia felt a deep certainty that she was making the right decision. The two of them were going to be just fine, with or without him. Isabella grew into a radiant child in the middle of the mountains of North Carolina. At 2 years old, she was already running through the hallways of the co-op where Sophia worked, speaking an adorable mix of English and the few words of Cherokee she had learned from the local artisans. Her strong personality manifested early. She was as stubborn as the father she didn't know, but she had her mother's artistic sensitivity. "Mommy, I want to make table too," she would say, tugging at Sophia's apron as she worked with wood. Sophia had set up a small corner with toy tools, where Isabella would spend hours building her own creations. Sophia's workshop had transformed into a small, prosperous business. Her furniture was sold in art galleries in Asheville and even in New York City, combining local artisanal tradition with a contemporary design that caught the eye of decorators and collectors. She had managed to buy a small but charming house in the historic downtown area, with a patio where Isabella played while she worked. "You've become a businesswoman," Carmen observed proudly, watching her sister coordinate orders and manage 3 employees. "Who would have thought that dreamy artist from Seattle had this business strength?" Sophia would smile, but sometimes she wondered if Jonathan would be proud to see her this way. She had developed a keen sense for numbers and planning that she never knew she possessed, as if the need to provide for Isabella had awakened dormant abilities. At night, after Isabella was asleep, Sophia maintained a ritual that Carmen considered both painful and necessary. She would look up Jonathan online, follow the news of his businesses, and see photos of him at social events, always alone, always with the same controlled and distant expression that she knew so well. "He hasn't changed at all," she would murmur to herself, looking at a photo of him at an inauguration in Miami. "He's still the same man afraid to feel." But there were moments when that certainty wavered. When Isabella did something that reminded her of Jonathan, like organizing her toys in perfect rows or counting her wooden blocks with mathematical seriousness, Sophia would feel a pang of longing so intense that she needed to sit down and take a deep breath. "Is Daddy working far away?" Isabella asked for the first time one Sunday afternoon. Seeing other children playing with their fathers at the park, Sophia felt her heart race. She had been preparing for that question for months, but she still wasn't ready. "Yes, my love. He has a very important job that keeps him far away. But does he love me?" The question came with the devastating innocence of children. "Of course he loves you," Sophia replied without hesitation, because deep down in her heart, she still believed it. Sometimes adults get confused, but the love is always there. Isabella accepted the explanation with the ease of a young child, but Sophia knew it wouldn't always be that way. One day, her daughter would ask more difficult questions, and she would have to find answers that wouldn't hurt her, that wouldn't create anger or resentment. For now, it was enough that Isabella was growing up surrounded by love, art, and the absolute certainty that she was wanted and valued. Now it's your turn to tell us. Do you think Sophia made the right decision by not contacting Jonathan? And what about Jonathan? Is it possible for him to truly change, or is he destined to be alone with his empire? Share your thoughts below. The man who was afraid of life. Leo Williams came into Sophia's life one afternoon in October when Isabella had just turned 2.5. He showed up at the co-op carrying a puppy with an injured paw, looking for someone who could help improvise a temporary splint until he could get to the vet's office. "Sorry to bother you," he said, with a shy smile that lit up his dark face. "I know you work with wood. Do you have anything that could serve as a support for this little paw?" Sophia was sanding a table when she looked up and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man with gentle hands holding the injured animal. There was something in his careful way of touching the dog that moved her immediately. "Of course," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Isabella, come see the puppy." The little girl ran to them with curiosity, and Leo knelt to get to her level, patiently explaining what had happened to the animal. "He got hurt, but he's going to be okay. Sometimes we need to take care of those who are hurt, right?" Isabella nodded solemnly, and to Sophia's surprise, she extended her small hand to pet the dog without showing any fear. "She likes animals," Leo observed, looking at Sophia with approval. "She likes everything that needs care," Sophia replied, watching how Isabella talked softly to the dog in her adorable mix of English and Cherokee. Leo gradually and naturally became a constant presence in their lives. First, there were occasional visits to show how the dog, whom Isabella had insisted on naming Limpy because of his injured paw, was recovering. Then came invitations for weekend lunches, walks through the historic district, and afternoons at the park, where Isabella ran freely while they talked. He never asked about her father. "It's none of my business," Leo simply replied one afternoon, watching Isabella play with other children. "You two are a complete family. If you ever want to tell me, I'll listen. If not, that's okay too." It was that simplicity that most attracted Sophia to Leo. He didn't try to solve her life or fill spaces she hadn't asked to be filled. He was just present, reliable, and gentle with Isabella in a way that made Sophia's heart warm and, at the same time, break a little. "Uncle Leo, can you teach me how to take care of Limpy?" Isabella asked one afternoon, using for the first time the affectionate title that Leo had naturally earned. "Of course, Princess. But first you have to learn that taking care of someone means being very patient and very gentle." Sophia watched these interactions with conflicting feelings. It was wonderful to see Isabella have a positive male figure in her life, someone who treated her with the affection and attention every child deserved. But it also awakened an old pain, the constant reminder that those scenes should have had Jonathan as the protagonist. Leo deserved a woman who could love him completely, without ghosts from the past. Isabella deserved a father who chose her out of love, not convenience. But for now, Sophia allowed herself to enjoy the peace that Leo brought into their lives. While Sophia was building a new life in Asheville, Jonathan was facing the biggest professional challenge of his career. A group of Japanese investors had shown interest in acquiring a significant portion of his company, but demanded expansion into alternative tourist markets. North Carolina had emerged as a golden opportunity: cheap land, unexplored tourism potential, and attractive government incentives. Asheville is perfect, his partner Robert explained during a morning meeting in the Caldwell Tower. Cultural tourism, proximity to the mountains, preserved colonial architecture. The Japanese are talking about investing $20 million if we can establish a solid base there. Jonathan looked out of the window, trying to ignore the strange sensation the city's name gave him. Asheville, the place where Sophia had fled 3 years earlier, where she had built her new life far from him. For months he had managed to push those thoughts to the back of his mind, but now they came back with full force. "Are there any historical properties available?" he asked, keeping his voice professional. "Several. Colonial houses that could be turned into boutique hotels, land with a panoramic view of the mountains. I need someone to go there to do an in-person evaluation." Jonathan knew he should send Robert or one of the other partners. It was the most logical, most professional decision. But a force he couldn't name made him hesitate. "I'll go," he heard himself say. Robert seemed surprised. "You yourself? But we have that project in San Francisco that needs your attention." "San Francisco can wait. If we're going to invest $20 million in North Carolina, I want to personally see what we're buying." That night, alone in his apartment, Jonathan wondered if he was making a mistake. 3 years had passed. Sophia had probably moved on, maybe even found someone new. The little girl, if she really existed, if she was really his, would already be 2 years old. She would be a real person with her own personality, no longer just an ultrasound image. He had become an expert at suffocating those thoughts, but the prospect of being in the same city as them brought them to the surface with renewed intensity. And what if he ran into Sophia by chance? And what if he saw the little girl? How would he react? How would he explain 3 years of silence? Dr. Hernandez had called the previous week with the results of his routine exams. "Your sperm count has improved significantly, Jonathan. I don't know what you're doing differently, but your body seems to be recovering well from the old infection." The words resonated in his mind as he booked a flight to Asheville. Recovery. Possibility. Words that came too late, loaded with a weight he didn't know if he could carry. Robert had warned him that the business trip would last at least a week. An entire week in the city where Sophia lived. A week to find out if he still thought about her, if he still loved her, if he was still too cowardly to admit that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The flight was scheduled for Sunday in March. Exactly 3 years after he had thrown Sophia out of his life. Don't forget to subscribe. Another incredible story is waiting for you on the screen. And for now, let's continue with this one. Part 6. The Man Who Returned. The flight from Seattle to Asheville was torturous, with turbulence that seemed to reflect Jonathan's emotional state. During the 2-hour drive to Asheville, he tried to concentrate on the documents for the properties he was going to evaluate, but his eyes kept getting lost in the mountainous landscape that unfolded outside the window of the rental car. Asheville welcomed him with a crystal-clear blue sky and stone streets that seemed to whisper stories from centuries past. The city was smaller than he had imagined, more intimate, more welcoming than the urban centers where he was used to doing business. Every corner seemed to hold secrets. Every colonial house told a different story. Jonathan checked into the Hotel Carolina, right in the historic center, and spent the first day visiting the properties on his list. An 18th century mansion that could be turned into a boutique hotel, a piece of land with a panoramic view of the mountains, an old farm that needed a complete restoration. Work, numbers, cost-benefit analysis, all very familiar, very safe. But on every corner he turned, on every square he crossed, his eyes involuntarily searched for a familiar face. How many times did he think he had seen Sophia walking in the distance, only to discover it was a stranger with similar hair? How many times did his heart race when he heard a woman's laughter that could have been hers? The second night, dining alone at a restaurant near the hotel, Jonathan overheard a conversation at the next table that made his blood run cold. "Sophia makes the most beautiful furniture in the city," one woman was saying to her companion. "You need to visit her workshop at the co-op, and her little girl is such a sweetheart." Little girl. So it was true. The girl existed. She had survived. She was growing up right there, just a few blocks from where he was sitting, pretending to eat his roasted pork dish. "What's the girl's name?" the other woman asked. "Isabella. Such a beautiful, smart little girl. Seems like she got her mom's intelligence." Jonathan dropped his fork onto the plate with a clatter that made the women turn to look at him. He mumbled an apology and tried to get back to his meal, but the words echoed in his mind. Isabella. His daughter had a name. She had a personality. She was being described as smart and beautiful by strangers who knew her better than he did. That night, lying in his hotel bed, Jonathan stared at the ceiling for hours without being able to sleep. She was there, just a few minutes' walk away. Sophia and Isabella, living their lives, building memories, creating bonds that didn't include him. 3 years of history he had lost. 3 years he could never get back. In the morning, he canceled 2 scheduled visits and went for a walk through the streets of Asheville without a specific destination. Just walking, breathing the thin mountain air, trying to muster the courage to do something he should have done 3 years ago. Find them, ask for forgiveness, try to rebuild what he had destroyed with his cowardice and pride. The craft market operated on Sundays in the Plaza de la Paz. It was Sunday. The Plaza de la Paz craft market was bustling with life when Jonathan arrived that Sunday morning. Families strolled among the colorful stalls. Children ran between the adults' legs. Vendors offered their goods with genuine smiles. The smell of local coffee mixed with incense hung in the air, creating an almost magical atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the nervousness growing in Jonathan's chest. He walked slowly among the stalls, feigning interest in the products on display, while his eyes scanned every female face. Traditional textiles, amber jewelry, hand-painted ceramics. Everything passed by in a blur as his heart beat faster and faster. What if she wasn't there? What if she had changed so much that he wouldn't recognize her? And then he saw her. Sophia was behind a stall filled with small furniture and decorative wooden objects, explaining the detailed process to an interested client. Her hair was shorter, pulled back in a casual bun, and she wore a simple blue cotton dress that highlighted her natural tan. There was something different in her posture, more confident, more self-assured. But her smile was still the same one that had captivated Jonathan at that art gallery 5 years ago. A small girl was playing beside her, building towers with small wooden blocks. She had dark, curly hair and brown skin, and her movements were graceful and determined. Isabella, his daughter. Jonathan felt his legs tremble. For 3 years, he had imagined this moment, but no fantasy had prepared him for the reality of seeing his own flesh and blood for the first time. Isabella was real, alive, perfect. The little girl ran to Sophia with a wooden block in her hand, showing her something she had created. It was in that moment that Jonathan saw something that made his world stop completely. On Isabella's left arm, clear and unmistakable, was a birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, exactly like his own mark, in the same place and the same size. The air left his lungs as if he had been punched. There was no more doubt, no more possibility of denial. Isabella was his daughter, his own flesh and blood, literally carrying his genetic mark on her body. His legs began to buckle, and he leaned against a nearby tree, trying to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. 3 years. 3 years lost. 3 years that beautiful girl had grown up without a father, that Sophia had raised a child alone, that he had squandered the opportunity to be part of the most precious family he could ever have. Sophia finished with her client and turned to put away some objects. It was then that her eyes met his across the crowd. Jonathan saw the exact moment she recognized him. Her eyes widened, the smile disappeared, and she instinctively pulled Isabella toward her, as if protecting her daughter from a threat. They looked at each other for long seconds, separated by physical distance and by 3 years of pain, silence, and regret. Jonathan approached slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might flee at any sudden movement. Each step seemed to last an eternity. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears like a war drum. The sounds of the market, conversations, laughter, background music, turned into a distant murmur as his attention focused entirely on the woman and the child watching him. "Sophia," he said, when he got close enough for her to hear him without needing to shout. His voice was hoarser than usual, loaded with 3 years of unsaid words. Sophia lifted her chin in a display of strength that he immediately recognized. It was the same gesture she made when she was preparing for a difficult discussion, when she was gathering all her inner courage to face something that scared her. "Jonathan," she replied, her voice controlled, but with a slight tremor that betrayed her apparent calm. "What are you doing here?" Isabella, curious about the stranger's presence, looked at him with big, expressive eyes that were astonishingly similar to his own. She showed no fear, just a natural childish curiosity about someone new. I'm here for work," he lied partially, unable to admit that he had come specifically looking for her, evaluating properties for a hotel project. "What a coincidence," Sophia said, and there was a touch of sarcasm in her voice that he knew well. Jonathan looked at Isabella, who was now playing with her wooden blocks, seemingly uninterested in the adult's conversation. The birthmark on her arm was even more evident up close, a perfect crescent moon that left no room for doubt about his paternity. She has the same mark as me," he murmured, barely managing to articulate the words. Sophia followed his gaze, and for a moment her mask of control wavered. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jonathan." "Sophia, please." He took another step closer, and she instinctively pulled Isabella even closer to her. "The mark on her arm is identical to mine. You know it." Isabella looked up from her toys and at Jonathan with renewed curiosity. "Mommy, who is he?" The simple, innocent question hit Jonathan like a bullet to the chest. His daughter didn't know him. To her, he was just a stranger, interrupting her morning of play at the market. Sophia knelt down to Isabella's level, keeping her eyes on Jonathan as she spoke to her daughter. He's just a man I knew a long time ago, my love." "An important man?" Isabella asked, remembering the story her mom always told about the daddy who worked far away. The world stopped again. Sophia looked Jonathan in the eye, and he saw in that look a forgiveness he didn't deserve, a second chance he had squandered, a love that had survived 3 years of abandonment and rejection. "Yes," Sophia said softly, without looking away from him. "A very important man." Isabella stood up and walked to Jonathan with the fearless confidence that only small children possess. She stopped right in front of him, tilted her head back to see his face, and held out her arm with the birthmark. "Look, I have a moon," she said proudly, as if she were showing him the most precious treasure in the world. Jonathan slowly knelt down to get to her level, and with trembling hands, he rolled up his shirt sleeve, revealing the identical mark on his left arm. "I have a moon too," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Isabella's eyes widened in surprise and delight. She looked from her mark to his, then back to hers, processing the impossible coincidence with the simple logic of children. "They're the same," she exclaimed, delicately touching the mark on Jonathan's arm. "Mommy, look! He has a moon just like mine." Sophia had stood up and was watching them with tears in her eyes. 3 years of secrets. 3 years of protecting Isabella from the painful truth. 3 years of building a careful narrative about the absent father. Everything crumbled in that simple, pure moment of recognition. "Isabella," Sophia said softly, her voice trembling. "Do you want to know who this man is?" The girl was thrilled, still fascinated by the discovery of the matching marks. Sophia took a deep breath, looked Jonathan in the eye, and he saw in that look a forgiveness he didn't deserve, a second chance he had squandered, a love that had survived 3 years of abandonment and rejection. "This is your daddy, my love. The daddy I always told you worked far away." The world stopped again. Isabella looked from Sophia to Jonathan, then back to Sophia, her little eyes processing the most important information of her young life. Jonathan felt as if he were about to faint, as if the ground were about to disappear from under his feet. "My daddy?" Isabella asked, her voice small but full of curiosity. "My real daddy?" "Yes, princess," Sophia whispered. "Your real daddy." Isabella turned to Jonathan, who was still kneeling in front of her, and asked the question he knew would come, the question for which he had no adequate answer. "Why were you away for so long?" Jonathan felt the tears stream down his face, the first tears he had shed since the infertility diagnosis 15 years ago. How could he explain to a 3-year-old girl about fear, pride, cowardice? How could he tell his own daughter that he had rejected her even before he met her? "Because I was very scared," he finally said, with the brutal honesty that only children deserve. "Scared of not being a good daddy for you." Isabella considered this answer with the seriousness that children dedicate to important matters. Then, with a smile that broke and rebuilt Jonathan's heart simultaneously, she extended her small hand and touched his tear-streaked face. "But now you're not scared anymore? Now it's time for you to weigh in. Do you think Jonathan can truly be a part of their lives, or is it too late? What would you do in Sophia's shoes? Would you forgive him? Tell us your thoughts below." The journey to redemption. Isabella's question resonated in the air like a direct challenge to Jonathan's soul. Still on his knees in front of his daughter, he looked into her eyes, eyes that were mirrors of his own, and felt the weight of 3 years of wrong decisions pressing down on his shoulders. "I'm still scared," he admitted, his voice coming out in a rough whisper. "But now I know that being scared is no excuse for being away from the people we love." Isabella nodded, with the inexplicable wisdom of children who grow up feeling the lack of something important. "Uncle Leo said that when we're scared, we need to be brave anyway." The mention of another man in his daughter's life hit Jonathan like a punch. Of course there would be another man. Of course Sophia would have moved on, built a new life, found someone who knew how to value what he had rejected. He looked at Sophia over Isabella's head. "Uncle Leo?" "A friend," Sophia replied quickly. But there was something in her voice, a defensiveness he recognized, an instinctive protection of something precious. Jonathan stood up slowly, still processing the magnitude of what he had discovered. His daughter existed. She was real. She was perfect. But she also had a completely formed life, established relationships, a routine that didn't include him. 3 years was an eternity in a small child's life. "Can we talk?" he asked Sophia. "Alone?" Sophia hesitated, looking at Isabella, who was now playing with her blocks again, seemingly absorbed in her constructions after the intense emotional moment. "Carmen?" Sophia called to a nearby woman, who immediately approached. Jonathan recognized Sophia's sister from the photos she had shown him long ago. Carmen looked at him with a coldness that made her opinion of his sudden appearance clear. "Can you stay with Isabella for a few minutes?" Sophia asked. Carmen nodded and sat down next to the girl, starting to help her with the blocks. Isabella accepted the change naturally, but her eyes kept returning to Jonathan, as if she were checking to see if he was still there. Sophia led him to a small corner farther from the stall, away from the curious ears of Isabella and Carmen. When they got there, she turned to him with her arms crossed, a defensive posture he knew well. 3 years, Jonathan," she said, her voice controlled but filled with pain. 3 years without a word, without a question, without a moment of curiosity about what happened to the child you said was impossible. "I know," he replied, knowing there were no sufficient excuses. "I know I was a coward, that I made the biggest mistake of my life, that I destroyed the best thing I had. And now?" she asked, tears finally beginning to escape. "Now you show up here. You see the physical proof that I was always telling the truth, and you expect what? That I'll just forget everything?" Jonathan took a step toward her, but she stepped back. "I hope for the opportunity to try and fix what I broke," he said. "The opportunity to get to know my daughter. The opportunity to prove that I can be the man you two deserve." Sophia looked at him for long seconds, her eyes full of tears she refused to let fall completely. In the distance, Isabella was laughing with Carmen, building taller and taller towers with her colorful blocks, oblivious to the conversation that would determine her future. "You don't understand, Jonathan," Sophia said finally, her voice trembling. "It's not just about you showing up and deciding you want to be a father now. Isabella has a life, routines, people who love her. She's been asking me about you for months, and I have to make up stories about why her daddy couldn't visit." Jonathan felt every word like a stab wound. "What kind of stories?" "That you work very far away, that you have important responsibilities, that you love her even if you can't be here." Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. White lies to protect a 3-year-old's heart. "They don't have to be lies," he said desperately. "I can change. I can transfer my business. I can set up an office here." "You can?" Sophia interrupted him. "The great Jonathan Caldwell abandoning Seattle, leaving his empire of glass and steel to come live in a small town in North Carolina?" There was sarcasm in her voice, but also something else. A cautious hope she was trying to hide behind irritation. "For her, yes," Jonathan replied, looking in Isabella's direction. "For both of you. For us. There is no us anymore, Jonathan. There is Isabella. There is me. There is the life we built here. And there is Leo." The mention of the name again made Jonathan's stomach clench. "Do you love him?" Sophia hesitated, a hesitation that lasted only a second, but that he noticed. "Leo is a good man. He's gentle. He treats Isabella as if she were his own daughter. He's never disappointed me. He's never rejected me. He's never made me feel like a liar for telling the truth." Each word was a painful comparison, a reminder of everything he had lost due to his cowardice. "But you didn't answer my question," he insisted softly. Sophia looked away, watching Isabella, who was now trying to teach Carmen to stack the blocks in a specific order. "What I feel or don't feel doesn't matter anymore. What matters is Isabella. She deserves stability, not a father who appears suddenly and might disappear again when things get difficult." "I won't disappear," Jonathan promised, taking a step toward her. "Sophia, I spent 3 years dying inside, 3 years knowing I had made the biggest mistake of my life, 3 years trying to convince myself I had made the right decision, when I knew deep down that I had destroyed the only chance for real happiness I ever had. For the first time since their reunion, Sophia looked him directly in the eyes, and he saw the woman he had loved. Vulnerable, hopeful, but also cautious. "Words are easy, Jonathan. You were always good with words when you wanted something. Then give me the opportunity to prove it with actions," he pleaded. "Let me get to know Isabella. Let me show you that I've changed." 3 days later, Jonathan was sitting in a small cafe in downtown Asheville, his hands trembling slightly as he waited. Sophia had agreed to let him spend an afternoon with Isabella, 2 supervised hours in a public place, away from the emotional intensity of their first reunion. Isabella arrived holding Sophia's hand, wearing a little yellow dress and carrying a cloth doll. Her eyes immediately found Jonathan, and when they did, she gave him a shy but genuine smile. "Hi, Daddy," she said, the word coming out naturally, as if she had been practicing it for the past few days. Jonathan's heart almost stopped. "Daddy." His daughter had called him Dad for the first time, and the sound was sweeter than any music he had ever heard. "Hi, Princess," he replied, kneeling to get to her level. "Did you bring your doll?" Isabella nodded and showed him the doll. "Her name is Luna, because of our mark." Jonathan looked at Sophia, who was watching the interaction with cautious but not hostile eyes. She was wearing a simple cotton blouse and had her hair down. She was as beautiful as ever, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he knew he had caused. "Can I meet Luna?" he asked Isabella, who immediately handed him the doll. Over the next 2 hours, Jonathan discovered that his daughter was a charming little chatterbox. She told him about Limpy, Uncle Leo's puppy, about the crafts classes her mom taught, about how she liked to help at the co-op by organizing the small pieces of wood by color and size. "Can you count?" he asked, remembering his own childhood obsession with numbers. Isabella proudly began to count to 20 in English. Then she repeated it in Cherokee, to Jonathan's amazement. "Aunt Carmen taught me," she explained. "She says it's important to know how to talk to everyone." Jonathan looked at Sophia, who had remained silent for most of the meeting, watching every interaction with protective attention. "She's incredible," he murmured. "She's everything to me," Sophia replied, and there was a subtle warning in her voice. When it was time to say goodbye, Isabella surprised everyone by approaching Jonathan and giving him a tight hug. "Are you leaving again?" she asked, looking him in the eye with a seriousness that broke his heart. "No, Princess. Daddy is going to stay around." "Promise?" The simple question carried the weight of all the adults who had ever promised Isabella things and then disappeared from her life. Jonathan looked at Sophia, who was watching him intently. "I promise," he said, knowing he was making the most important commitment of his life. Isabella smiled and gave him another hug before running back to Sophia. As he watched them walk away down the cobblestone street, Jonathan knew his life had changed forever. No matter what it cost, no matter how many sacrifices he had to make, he would not lose Isabella again. And if he was lucky, maybe he wouldn't lose Sophia either. A week later, Jonathan was in the makeshift office of his hotel, surrounded by contracts, sales proposals, and documents that represented 15 years of his professional life. His Seattle company was worth millions, but for the first time in his life, money and power seemed insignificant compared to what truly mattered. He had spent the last few days with Isabella, whenever Sophia allowed him. Afternoons at the park, visits to the co-op where she played among the wooden tools, walks through the colonial streets, where she pointed out every architectural detail with the endless curiosity of a small child. Every moment together confirmed what he already knew. Isabella was his daughter in every sense, and he had wasted 3 precious years of his life. But Sophia remained distant, cordial, respectful, but distant. She let him spend time with Isabella, but she never allowed herself to be alone with him. She never fully let her guard down. And Leo. Leo appeared regularly, bringing gifts for Isabella, having dinner with them, occupying the space that should have been his. Jonathan picked up the phone and called Robert, his partner in Seattle. "How are the negotiations with the Japanese going?" Robert asked as soon as he answered. "Suspended," Jonathan replied. "Robert, I need to talk to you about something important. I'm going to transfer my main operations to Asheville." Silence on the other end of the line. "You're kidding, right?" "Jonathan, we have $20 million in contracts in progress, and you can handle it all. I'll keep a stake in the company, but I need to be here." "For a woman?" Jonathan hesitated. It was more complicated than that, but it was also exactly that. "For my daughter and for the woman I love." He hung up before Robert could respond and immediately called Dr. Hernandez. "Doctor, I need all my medical exams from the last 5 years, the originals, with certification. It's for a paternity proceeding." "Paternity?" "But Jonathan, you said you were infertile." Apparently I was wrong about a lot of things. That afternoon, Jonathan went to the co-op where Sophia worked. She was alone, sanding a small table with precise and graceful movements. Isabella was at Carmen's house, giving them an opportunity to talk without the innocent presence that made everything more complicated. "I brought some documents," he said, placing an envelope on the workbench. Sophia stopped sanding and looked at him with curiosity. "My complete medical exams, proof that my infertility wasn't absolute, that Isabella really is my biological daughter." "I never doubted it," she said softly. "I also brought the papers for my company transfer. I'm going to set up an office here in Asheville, not as a visitor, not as a tourist, but as a permanent resident." Sophia let go of the sandpaper completely, looking at him with genuine surprise. "I know you may never forgive me, and I know it might be too late for us, but it's not too late for Isabella, and I'm not going to make the mistake of abandoning her again." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Leo is a lucky man. I hope he knows the treasure he has." 6 months later, Jonathan woke up in a small but cozy apartment in downtown Asheville, with a view of the mountains that was now part of his morning routine. The smell of local coffee wafted from the kitchen, mixed with the sound of children's laughter coming from the building's inner courtyard. His new life had settled into a completely different rhythm from the one he had known in Seattle. His office occupied 2 floors of a restored colonial mansion, where he coordinated smaller but significant real estate projects, family inns, local restaurants, cultural spaces that respected the city's historical architecture. His partners in Seattle had initially resisted the change, but the financial results spoke for themselves. Sustainable tourism was the future, and Jonathan had positioned himself at the forefront of that trend. More important than business, however, was the routine he had built with Isabella. Every Wednesday and Saturday was theirs, entire afternoons exploring the city, teaching her about numbers and construction, listening to her stories about school and her friends. Isabella had adapted to her father's presence with the natural ease of children, treating him now as a permanent part of her life. "Daddy, are you going to the school play on Friday?" she had asked the day before while they played with building blocks in his apartment. "Of course, Princess. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Mommy said you and her are going to sit together." Jonathan's heart had raced with that information. In recent weeks, Sophia had become less distant, more open to the idea of co-parenting, even if they weren't a couple. It was progress, albeit slow. Leo had gradually left their lives, not due to conflict or drama, but with the gentle understanding that Jonathan was genuinely committed to staying, and that Sophia needed space to figure out what she really wanted. "Isabella deserves to have her real father nearby," he had said, in a mature and respectful conversation that left Jonathan even more aware of the good man who had almost taken his place. On the morning of that special Saturday, Jonathan arrived at Sophia's house to pick up Isabella and found her in the garden, watering the plants that had grown lush under the North Carolina sun. She was wearing a simple blue cotton dress, the same color she had worn on the day of their reunion at the market. "Good morning," he said. And for the first time in months, she smiled when she saw him. Not the polite, cautious smile that had become habitual, but the genuine smile he remembered from 5 years ago. "Isabella is getting ready," she said. "Would you like some coffee while you wait?" They sat in the small patio drinking coffee in a comfortable silence, while they listened to Isabella humming in the room. The morning sun filtering through the leaves created golden patterns on the stone ground. And for the first time since he had arrived in Asheville, Jonathan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Maybe love could be rebuilt, brick by brick, like a new house on old but solid foundations.
Lila Jensen stood quietly outside the hospital room, her fingers tightening slightly around the patient file in her hands. The name on the cover read Nathan Cole. Once a powerhouse in the financial world, now reduced to a stack of medical records detailing a T10 spinal cord injury, paralysis from the waist down, and presumed infertility. But none of that deterred Lila. She'd seen impossible things unfold. Sometimes, miracles begin with those who no longer believe in them. She knocked gently. "Mr. Cole? I'm Dr. Lila Jensen. I'll be handling your rehabilitation starting today." The voice came from the window, sharp as ice. "Another doctor who thinks they're a miracle, huh?" Nathan didn't turn. He sat motionless in his wheelchair, broad shoulders tense, dark hair flecked with silver. "You've probably read the file. 6 specialists, 8 months, 0 results." Lila maintained a calm, gentle smile as she stepped inside. "I don't promise miracles, Mr. Cole. I don't believe in impossible. I believe in what hasn't been explored yet." He turned to face her then, amber eyes locking onto hers. Distrustful, guarded, but not completely hollow. That's an interesting philosophy. But Hope and I parted ways a long time ago. "Then you're in luck," Lila replied, taking the seat across from him. "Because I don't need you to have hope. I just need your cooperation." A beat of silence. Then Nathan let out a soft, dry laugh, unexpected, almost foreign in the sterile heaviness of the room. "I like your honesty, Dr. Jensen." Lila didn't yet know what the road ahead would look like, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was going to help this man walk again, no matter what it took. Nathan studied her quietly after her firm declaration. Finally, he gave a small nod. "You're direct. I respect that." Lila smiled, sitting across from him and opening her tablet. "So, let's start from the beginning. I've read your file, but it doesn't tell the whole story." Nathan leaned back, his eyes dimming. She didn't push. With patients like him, silence was part of the therapy. "It happened at Glenshire Peak," he began, voice low like drifting smoke. "Our anniversary. She wanted photos near the cliff. The ground gave way. I saw it first. I pushed her out of danger." Lila let him speak, offering only quiet presence. "And I fell. 30 feet. Hit the rocks hard. Everything vanished. Diagnosis: complete spinal cord injury at T10. His voice tightened. No sensation from the waist down, no control, no hope. He turned toward the window. Trees swayed gently in the distance. While I was still in the ICU, she hired a lawyer, filed for divorce, said I was emotionally manipulative. But the truth, he swallowed hard, was that I couldn't father children. Leela shifted slightly. The meds. Steroids, anticoagulants, painkillers, side effects. I became completely infertile. Nathan's chuckle turned bitter. She didn't wait to see if I'd recover. Didn't care if I lived. All she saw was a man who couldn't walk, couldn't make love, couldn't give her a family. The air turned heavy. I lost everything. My company, my home, my name, myself. And the worst part, his eyes finally settled on Lila. I don't even blame her. I wouldn't want to stay with the man I became either. Lila drew a quiet breath, then spoke softly. You may have lost everything, but you're still here. You still have yourself. I see that in your eyes. You haven't truly given up. You're just too tired to fight alone. For the first time, Nathan looked at her not with suspicion, but with the faintest crack in his armor. The first official session began with soft morning sunlight spilling into the physical therapy room. Lila had arrived early, setting up equipment and reviewing her treatment plan. When Nathan was wheeled in, she wasn't wearing her usual white coat. Instead, she wore fitted athletic gear, her hair pulled neatly into a high ponytail. Good morning, Mr. Cole, she greeted him, her smile calm yet vibrant. Nathan glanced around, his gaze pausing at her, not used to seeing a doctor dressed like a fitness trainer. Today, I'm both, Lila replied, unfazed. We're starting therapy with a combination of neural stimulation and mechanical movement. It'll be physically close. He raised an eyebrow. Close? If that makes you uncomfortable, I can modify the approach. Nathan studied her for a moment, then shook his head. No, it's not that. Just, it's been a long time since anyone touched me for any reason other than clinical procedure. That beat of silence. Then let me be the first to do it with the purpose of healing. She helped him transfer onto the padded therapy table. When her hands moved to his waist, Nathan felt something, not quite sensation, but a strange awareness of his body. Do you feel anything? She asked, eyes fixed on his muscle response. No pain, but something. Pressure maybe, like awareness? That's good. That's a start. Throughout the session, Lila alternated between deep tissue stimulation and attaching electrodes to key muscle points. As the light current pulsed through his body, Nathan inhaled sharply. What is it? She asked immediately. I feel alive. Their eyes locked, and something shifted. It wasn't just patient and physician anymore, it was something new, a flicker of light after months of numbness and darkness. That afternoon, Lila took Nathan to the hydrotherapy wing, a private pool tucked into a quiet corner of the rehab center. The space was soft, lit by skylight, and the warm water shimmered like a gentle embrace. Nathan hesitated at the pool's edge, eyes uneasy. I haven't been in water since the accident, he said, his voice carrying the weight of memory. Lila knelt beside him, her hand resting on the wheelchair arm. You're not going in alone. I'll be there with you. She stepped into the water first, then offered her hand. Slowly, Nathan took it, allowing her to guide him in. The water wrapped around him, lifting his body, relieving the constant pressure on his frame. His breath deepened. Today, Lila said softly, we try standing. The water will support your weight. Her arm slipped behind his back, one hand steadying his arm. With great care, Nathan lowered his feet to the pool floor. His body trembled as gravity reintroduced itself to limbs long disconnected. I can feel the floor, he whispered, stunned. Not clearly, but it's there. Lila gave his hand a gentle squeeze. That's the beginning of standing again. In the warm water and golden light, the space between them began to blur. Each touch, her hand on his waist, her fingers adjusting his stance, was charged with something unspoken. their breathing synchronized with the rippling water. Nathan looked at her, his gaze softer than usual. "I dreamed of this." Lila glanced up. "Of standing?" He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not just standing. Standing with you." Lila froze for just a second, her heart skipping beneath the stillness of the pool. She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. And in that shared stillness, they both knew they had crossed into a space where treatment met something deeper, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. 1 week after his first neurological breakthrough, Lila invited Nathan to the hospital rooftop late one evening. "We'll try a new balance exercise," she said. "The brain responds better in unfamiliar environments. Natural light, fresh air, it helps." Nathan was brought up in his wheelchair, but this time he wasn't just an observer. She had prepared everything: safety bars, padded flooring, and an open space beneath the quiet night sky. "Ready?" Lila asked, offering her hand. He took it. Her hand was warm and steady. She stood in front of him, arms around his waist, steadying muscles still unsteady. Nathan gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and summoned every ounce of strength. 1 beat, 2 beats, and then he stood. For the first time in over a year. Not in water, not in a dream. On the rooftop, under the moonlight, Nathan Graham stood on his own 2 feet. A broken breath escaped him, and tears ran down his cheeks. Lila said nothing. She just wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't clinical. It wasn't professional. It was human, whole. In that embrace, he lowered his head, and she didn't move away. Their kiss was like the breeze, light, but filled with the depth of all they had been through. It wasn't impulse. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. That night, they didn't return to the hospital ward. In the doctor's on-call apartment, with soft lamplight filtering through white curtains, they found each other, not as therapist and patient, not as broken and healer, but as 2 souls, 2 bodies, finally free to meet. No barriers, no boundaries, no rules to play, only Nathan and Lila, touching, feeling, healing in the most human way. It was Lila who brought Nathan back to his room. Her steps were slow, as though each one held back something she couldn't say. The hallway lights flickered softly as she wheeled him forward, her hand never leaving his shoulder. At the doorway, she paused, longer than necessary. Her fingers lingered at the back of his neck, memorizing the curve of his skin. Nathan turned to look at her, but before he could speak, she leaned in, pressing her forehead gently to his. "I love you, Nathan," she whispered, barely audible. Then she pulled back. Her smile trembled, and when she turned away, she didn't look back. The next morning, Nathan woke with a strange feeling, equal parts joy and nervous hope. He looked forward to their session. He wanted to see her, to say her name without caution. But the hour passed, and she didn't come. There was no familiar knock, no Lila. A nurse entered instead. "Dr. Lila is on personal leave," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. That afternoon, on the table beside his bed, Nathan found a small folded note. "I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye. After last night, I realized I can't continue treating you while carrying these feelings. I need time to think clearly. L." Nathan's hand clenched the paper. The pain didn't explode, it seeped in quietly like a crack widening in his chest. Just then, the door opened. Lisa, his ex-wife, the woman he thought gone for good, stood in the doorway, her hair thin, her frame frail. "I don't have much time," she whispered. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Nathan couldn't speak. "I'm not asking you to come back," Lisa said softly. "Just to forgive me." 1 month after leaving the hospital, Lila quietly flew to London. No goodbye, no message. She joined a private research center, continuing her work on neural stimulation. the same technology that had once given hope to patients, and connected her to Nathan. London rained often. The small apartment she rented near the lab stayed cold. She lived quietly, letting the work consume her. But soon, her body began to change. Nausea, dizziness, unexplainable fatigue. One morning, staring at a positive pregnancy test, Leela felt her breath catch. She knew whose child it was, a result of that one night. But she also knew she wouldn't tell him, because days after she left, an anonymous letter arrived. Inside was a photo, Nathan holding Lisa's hand at the hospital bedside, his gaze soft, their fingers intertwined. No explanation, just a single line. They've gotten back together. Lila stared at the photo for hours. Her heart cracked, so she vanished completely. Across the ocean, Nathan drifted through each day in silence. Lila had disappeared as if she never existed. He had no idea that, amid the quiet, something was growing. A new life, carrying part of him, and every word they had left unsaid. 2 years had passed since Leela disappeared. Nathan, now able to walk on his own with the help of a cane, carried not just the physical strength he'd earned through relentless therapy, but also the quiet ache of something unresolved, something that never left him. He was no longer the hopeless man staring out a hospital window, but in the space she left behind, no recovery ever felt complete. There were no messages, no letters. It was as if she had vanished from the world. Until one evening, his eyes caught a familiar name in a medical journal. Dr. Leela Dawson, now leading a neuro-recovery research team at a renowned institute in London. So he went. No warning, no expectations, just a faint hope that he might see her, just once. The hospital garden was peaceful under the soft afternoon light, and there she was, near a row of lavender bushes, her posture, her hair unmistakable, bending to tie a child's shoelace. Then 2 more children ran toward her, squealing with laughter. 3 children, all with dark brown hair, hazel eyes, and that unmistakable cleft chin. Nathan froze in place. His cane tilted slightly, his heart pounded with disbelief, confusion, wonder. Leela looked up, and the world stopped. Her breath hitched as her gaze locked onto his. The file in her hand slipped slightly, and her knees trembled. Not from fear, but from the sudden wave of everything she had buried. For a moment, the children's voices faded, the hospital dissolved, and it was just them. Her eyes welled up, jaw tightening as if holding back years of words. She didn't move. She couldn't. All she could do was look and feel. Then, with a voice hoarse, trembling, and full of unshed questions, he asked, "Lila, why didn't you tell me?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I thought you were building a life with her. And I didn't want to be the woman who begged to be chosen." He stepped closer, voice raw. "You were never second choice. You were the only choice I ever wanted." Nathan said nothing more. He simply stepped forward, dropped to his knees in the garden, and wrapped his arms around the 3 children. Tears streamed down his face, soaking into their soft hair. 3 tiny lives he hadn't known, yet somehow had loved all along. Lila stood frozen, one trembling hand covering her mouth. Years of composure cracked in that moment, letting her heart finally soften. Nathan looked up. His eyes weren't filled with blame, only the quiet pain of a man who had nearly lost everything to a cruel misunderstanding. "I never got back together with Lisa," he said gently. "She was dying. All she wanted was to apologize. That photo you received, it was sent by someone else. Lisa told me everything before she passed. She wasn't forced to leave me. She left because she knew she couldn't have children, and she didn't want me to find out the truth." Lila's breath caught. "You mean you're not—" "It wasn't me," Nathan nodded. "It was her. But instead of facing it, she made up the story, left in a way that let her walk away without guilt. And me, I was left with nothing until I met you. In that quiet garden, two broken people stood face to face. They needed no more words. Their hands found each other. This time, to hold on. For real, for always. 2 months later, in that same garden, a small wedding was held. No extravagant dress, no grand crowd, just close friends, quiet laughter, and 3 tiny ring bearers in toddler suits taking turns dropping the rings, making everyone laugh. Leela wore a simple white dress, flowers in her hair, holding hands with the man who had once fallen, who had once been shattered, but now stood again, not just on his legs, but on the strength of love. As golden sunlight bathed the garden, Nathan turned to her, voice steady, eyes full. I didn't just learn how to stand again, I learned how to love again, and it's all because of you.